That was Frank Sinatra with Fly Me to the Moon, and you're listening to the Ball Earth Skeptic Roundtable, episode number 2, broadcast live on Thursday, June 18, 2015. I'm your host, John the Bond, and I'm joined again live from Spain by the man who does his own experiments and posts them online for you to check for yourself, Matrix Decode. Matrix, how are you today?
Hey John, good thanks. Good late night last night. Just looking forward to the show.
Good stuff. And we're also joined live from New York by David Weiss of Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole. David, thanks for taking the time.
Hey, thanks, John. Glad to be here and excited to look at facts and see what we can come up with.
Excellent stuff. Well, before we get to all of that, what did you think of Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra?
Fantasy.
Let me give you a bit of trivia about that one. It was recorded on June 9, 1964, that one that we just heard then. And that means that it was recorded 5 years before the first man went to the moon with 1969 technology. Interesting, isn't it?
Very.
Yeah, we'll talk more about NASA later. Listen, I've got a bit of a rundown that I want to get through tonight. So hopefully in the 2 hours we can address the following things. Firstly, we're going to discuss our own actual opinions right now about the Earth that we stand on, because it's important that listeners understand where we're coming from and where we're at right now with our research. The second thing I want to talk about is this meme that's being pushed by certain sections that this discussion of the flat Earth or of ball Earth skepticism is a PSYOP or a CIA operation or what have you. I think we should briefly discuss what we think about that meme that's being pushed. And while we're on that, we might quickly address the show that was on earlier today, my time, last night, your time. We'll do a live. They obviously addressed the ball Earth theory. So we'll just touch on a couple of things that came up on their show. Then we'll talk quickly about the scientific method, what the scientific method actually is, in our opinions. And then we'll get into the fun part. We'll look at some of the problems with the spinning ball theory, because that's what this show is all about. It's the ball Earth skeptic. We look at the theory, the ball Earth, the spinning ball Earth, hurtling through space theory, and we look at what we think are some problems. And tonight, hopefully, we'll get time to look at the Coriolis effect, boats drifting beyond a horizon and curvature, space, thrust in a vacuum and satellites in particular, and also inductive logic, people saying, well, if all I can see is circles, this must be a circle. We're hoping to address that today. And then I'd love to spend the last part of the show talking about some of the problems with flat Earth theory, because if you're going to look at some of the problems with one theory, you need to be consistent and look at problems with other competing theories. So plenty to talk about tonight. And we might as well get started off with you there, Matrix. Do you want to give people a basic idea of where you're at right now when it comes to your research about the Earth that we stand on?
Oh, okay. I mean, where I'm at right now, I'm still, after last night, same place. I mean, for me, from the research that I've done over the last 6 months, spent almost every day looking at this and hours every day watching as many videos, doing as much research, re-looking at everything that we've been told, that I've been told my whole life about science and so many aspects of our life. This subject involves everything virtually, and at this point, what I see is the Earth appears to be flat, and I'm really the evidence to me is much greater for the flat Earth argument at this point in time, and all the sphere arguments or the vast majority of them can be sort of debunked, argued, disproven, and it's trying to do experiments to prove it one way or the other. And apply that to where we are. For me, it's a really important subject. It seems to be like the biggest hoax or conspiracy or secret out there. A lot of evidence points towards this. It's just something I'm investigating as a truth seeker. Honestly, openly. I present my evidence. I present how I see things as they are at this point in time. And,
so I know it's hard to quantify, Matrix, but if you could try to put some kind of figure on it, roughly what percentage right now, probability, do you think it is that the Earth is flat on one model or another, roughly where are you at with that?
Well, I would say I'm at this point, and it's taken a long time to get there. I would say I'm at this point, I'm 100% it's flat. But if I see evidence otherwise, then I will change my mind.
Well, that's fair enough. Well, I'll throw to you there, Dirth, live from New York. Same question as I just put to Matrix. What if you had to try and put some kind of percentage on it? How confident are you that on one model or another, the Earth that we stand on is flat?
I am fairly new to this. Several months I've been looking into this. I only spoke out about it about a month ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, publicly, because the concept of the Earth being flat from our programming from infancy is really difficult to break. But as a truth seeker, I try to look at every argument and find a reason that it's provable or not provable. I'm kind of with Matrix. I'm hesitant to say I'm 100%, but I could tell you that I'm 100% that the Earth is not a ball. So that I'll say.
That's a good answer, Dirth. And basically my position right now is I've only been heavily looking into this for a couple of months, so I can't say too confidently what I believe is the case, but I've seen enough evidence now that the current heliocentric spinning ball 1,000 miles at the equator, the thing that's taught at school, I'm 99% confident that is complete and utter nonsense. In terms of the flat Earth model, as I'll discuss later on, I've still got a few problems, so I wouldn't even say that I'm 50% on flat, but what is in between the flat and the ball model is a whole lot of doubt and curiosity, and that's where I'm at right now. So I'm a bit like what someone said to me recently. They said that they're an agnostic. I like that term. So I hope you guys don't mind if I do question you on your beliefs, and you can question me on mine, and we can have an open discussion, because that's what being a truth seeker is all about, being allowed to ask questions, think about things, and to be able to say that you don't know. Now, I wanted to look topic
hang
two
on,
tonight.
Hang on, John. Quick question. It's kind of a very loose question. If somebody had the actual answer and could give it to you now and says if you pick the right answer, they'll give you $10,000, which answer would you pick?
Yeah, look, and when you asked that question to Hoy, I know on Fakeologist the other day, I noticed that he wasn't too happy. I'm happy to answer that one myself, though. Right now, if you said that it's definitely either flat or ball or what's the other one right now? Concave. See, I haven't even spent any time properly looking at concave. I've looked at a couple of sites, but at the moment I'm still looking at ball and flat more than anything else. But suppose you said to me that it's definitely one of those three and I had to pick, then I would go with flat. But right now, I'm not sure that they're the only three options. There could be more out there. So right now, I've got far more objections to ball than I do to flat. I haven't looked at concave, so I can't even comment on it. I think until you've really looked at a theory, you can't just ridicule it or say it's crazy or say it's wrong until you've spent time looking at it. And it amazes me how many people haven't even watched one of Dubai's, like he's got a 90-minute documentary. If you haven't even spent 90 minutes to watch it, how can you say that he's wrong? I mean, I've bought a copy of his book. I'm a third of the way through his book. He makes some terrific points. There's a couple of points that I don't find convincing. That's what it's meant to be about, looking at it for yourself. So to answer your question right now, if I had to choose one, flat, but I'm not convinced by flat. I've still got some issues, and we'll get to that later in the show. Now, the second topic that I wanted to talk about tonight, boys, just briefly, Matrix and I discussed this on our impromptu chat a few days ago, but you would have noticed on the We'll Do It Live earlier today that they kept on constantly, every few minutes, saying that this is a CIA psyop, this is a psyop, this is a psyop. They constantly kept repeating it, almost like that was a strategy from the start to try and blacken the name of questioning the planet, almost to say as if you question spinning Earth ball theory, then you're part of a psyop. But I don't know if that was their intention. It certainly came across that way, but this is something that people have been saying, that people questioning the spinning ball, that you're playing into a psyop. I'll go to you first there, Matrix. If you could briefly explain to people your thoughts on that, what would they be?
Okay, well, I don't believe it's a CIA psyop. I think it's illogical to argue that for a CIA psyop to ridicule the truth movement, to divide the truth movement. I think it's illogical, because why would the CIA want us to investigate everything to do with NASA? We evaluate everything to do with science. And once you start doing that, you're unraveling their decades of hard work, or centuries of hard work to convince us of, to manipulate and control our minds, our ways of thinking. Secondly, the idea that it ridicules the truth community. The truth community is already a subject of ridicule. Whether you talk about 9/11, Sandy Hook, Boston, or aliens, or whatever it is you want to talk about, anything conspiracy related is a subject of ridicule. So, both of the arguments for it being a CIA psyop seem to be illogical. I mean, sure, there is that potential, but I mean, to me, the CIA psyop is really just as simple as saying it's a CIA psyop to stop people just looking at information. People can make up their own minds. It's just information, and if there's validity to it, people will get into it and look further. If there's no validity, they'll write it off.
So you've got basically two objections there, Matrix. The first objection is that if we're to believe this is a CIA psyop, where people like Sargent and Dubai are coming out and pointing out all the problems with NASA, all the problems with the moon landings, pointing out how much of it, and we'll get to more of this later, is completely illogical, then if we're to believe this is a psyop, then it means that whoever's in charge of the psyop, the authorities, if we can just call them that, they're giving away some of their biggest hoaxes. They're admitting to their biggest hoaxes to try and put us off track. You have to think through this. If you're saying that someone like Sergeant Dubai, myself, you, Matrix, all the people online talking about this, if some of us are here to poison the well or to make people throw the baby out with the bathwater, I must have heard that comment like 5 times in the first hour on their show today, baby out with the bathwater. If that's what we're here to do, then you have to also believe that we're also willing to admit the NASA fakery, and that's one of the biggest hoaxes of all time. So we're going to give up this huge hoax. It beggars belief. But then you've got the other issue of the second point you're making there, Matrix, is you're also trying to say, if critical thinkers, if conspiracy theorists, if hoax busters talk about Ball Earth, then we'll lose legitimacy or be ridiculed. Well, hold on. With the mainstream media, when are we ever given a chance in the first place? When are we ever not ridiculed? Never. So this notion of, there's topics that are off limit because it'll make us sort of look bad, that's ridiculous. Dirth, I'll throw to you.
Well, if it is a government psyop and they were wondering where the funding comes, I would like to know where the funding comes also, because I could use a check. It's insane. Like when I was on Fakeologist, they accused me of infiltrating their show to put my agenda across, and when in fact I'd never even heard of Fakeologist, and they're the ones that invited me on, and I offered to answer questions about my experience with 9/11 since I'm right here on the edge of New York City. It's you said it well. It's crazy to think that this is a psyop. Now, not to say that there are not disinfo agents out there, muddying the waters. I believe the website is Flat Earth Conspiracy or Flat Earth, I forget the name of the group, is out there putting out ridiculous, flat Earth arguments to make us look stupid. And let me just say that the subject of Flat Earth can and will be used against us to discredit anything else we have ever said. And to the sleeping public, when they hear that these are the same guys that think the Earth is flat, people will tune out without investigation, and that's, as we all know, the height of ignorance.
Yeah, but what are we supposed to believe here, Dirth? That there was some point, suppose you, I, Matrix, and others, and we've got 35 people watching live right now, that those 35, if all of us never questioned Ball Earth, that at some point down the line, we were going to be getting positive exposure from CNN or Fox? Like, is that what we're supposed to believe? Oh, no, now you've tainted your names, because when you get a platform of millions, now you'll be able to be easily discredited. What a load of nonsense. I mean, the only people in my life who know that I'm spending hours every week researching this are the people who I tell myself. When is there ever going to be a time when the news says, oh, a man based in Brisbane has been questioning Ball Earth, so don't listen to him when he says Sydney Siege is a hoax? I mean, are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. That said, I don't think it's crazy to believe that there is authority involvement within the Ball Earth skepticism. That's what I call it, Ball Earth skepticism. Let's call it flat Earth. Of course, it's not crazy to think that there's authority involvement in the flat Earth movement? I am certain there is. I've been doing lots of research, reading lots of stuff, checking different forums, watching lots of different videos, and there's one or two people who I'm sure are here to misdirect the kind of the questioning or the skepticism that we're trying to do. I've got no doubt about that. But that's very different from the entire baller skepticism, the entire questioning of where we're living from, or where we're living, coming from the authorities at the top. It makes much more sense that they try and direct it in different ways. And the easiest way to get around that is to just do your own research from the get-go. And that's all we're really trying to encourage people to do, is to do your own research. If someone says, this proves that the Earth is a spinning ball, then say, okay, how does it prove that the Earth is a spinning ball? I'll look into that. Or if someone says, I can prove that this aspect of flat Earth doesn't work, then say, okay, let me check that for myself. And then, even if that does disprove flat Earth, that doesn't necessarily mean spinning ball. We're being told we have to believe in spinning ball, and we ought to get some good evidence for it. And hopefully tonight we can spend some time looking at some certain aspects of spinning ball that to us don't make sense. And with that said, I just want to move on to, very quickly, the scientific method. This is important. I heard it mentioned on the show, like I said earlier today, late last night, your time. This idea of using science, that you have to use science. I completely agree we have to use science, and in a moment I'll read out what I think the scientific method is. But before I do, Matrix, you've actually gone and done your own experiment, and your experiment was based on simple mathematics. Do you want to expand on that very quickly?
Okay, I mean, can I just add something about the SIOP very quickly? I believe the CIA SIOP is to say it's a CIA SIOP, and what we have is so-called truthers ridiculing other truthers for investigating the subject itself, for actually bothering to do research and investigation. So I think it's worked. The CIA SIOP has worked on the truth community to stop them from looking at the information, well, a lot of people from looking at the information, and has caused people to ridicule other truthers for looking at the information. I think that's worked very well within the community itself. So yeah, I mean, it's about doing experiments, and the curvature. I mean, the experiments I've done so far are to repeat the Bedford level experiment over water, over a body of water. You know, we're not talking about over land where there's mountains, valleys, and what have you. So across water, and you know, if the Earth is 25,000 miles in circumference, as they like to say it is, or it's 24,900. Whatever, right? It's virtually 25,000 miles. There will be, you could measure the curvature, and the mathematics is, the correct mathematics is, the expected drop from the observation point will be 8 inches for the first mile and 8 inches for the second mile squared. So you go 8 times 2 times 2, or 8 times 3 times 3 miles, and that's how you work out the curvature drop in inches, and you divide that by 12 to work out how much that is in feet. And you know, the Bedford level experiment itself, when you look into that, on Wikipedia, they only say that that experiment is debunked by a photo of Earth from space. They don't say the mathematics is debunked. They don't say the experiment is debunked. It's a very short, surprisingly brief description of the experiment, and it shows how little and how few experiments have been done to refute the Bedford level experiment. But it's, you know, according to Wikipedia, it's only debunked by a photo of Earth from space, which brings in the whole NASA picture of Earth. You know, the 1972 Apollo 17 blue marble picture. And,
and if people want more information on the Bedford level experiments, they can just go to your video matrix. The point here is you actually went out there with a camera, with a telephoto lens. You took footage which showed that you couldn't see the curvature that was meant to be there. And the curvature that's meant to be there, anybody can do the maths for themselves, because it's basic trigonometry. And it works out to be that for every mile from your distance that you're looking at across the horizon, there should be 8 inches times the mile squared in drops over 3 miles, 3 squared, 9 times 8, 72 inches, etc. And the reason why it goes like that is because we're supposed to be on a sphere or something spherical, so it's meant to be somewhat circular. So this is just basic circular maths that anybody can do for themselves. So when people say that we should be using science, I completely agree with them. And this is basic science that anyone can do for themselves. And of course, the objection that's offered to Bedford level experiments is, oh, the light refracts. There's light refraction. So then you ask them, okay, well, what's the scientific method, or what's the scientific model? What are the calculations that I can do to work out how much refraction there should be? And you'll get crickets. So the people who tell you that we should have science, we should focus everything on science, they're happy to go along with science until their science is challenged. And all of a sudden, they're not so interested in science anymore. It becomes dogma. Well, we believe in science. And in the live chat, we've got 40 people watching live right now. Honest Trolling makes the point. It's science. Don't you like your iPads? And of course, he's mocking this, false equivalence that was made on We'll Do It Live earlier today, where they're sort of suggesting if there's scientific progress made in one area, say electronics, then we have to accept all of science. And if you don't want to accept spinning ball earth theory, then you have to give up your computers or something like this. Now, that's a very infantile argument, but that's one of the arguments that was made today. And you have to wonder, how far have they really thought this through? I'm not sure they've really thought it through as far as I think they have, Dirth. What say you?
I don't. No, it was a ridiculous statement, and I actually I heard it briefly, but I just want to double back a second. You're talking about the how the horizon drops off. There's people that are so programmed into the Earth being a ball that they will insist that it only drops off 8 inches per mile. So 10 miles is 80 inches, which is absurd. That's basically, you're talking about a ramp, a straight ramp that drops 8 inches per mile, but the Earth isn't a ramp. It's in their argument, it's a round ball. So it's an ever increasing, an increasing slope. And the explanation I use, and it's amazing that people can't see this, if you're standing at 12 o'clock on the top of a ball and someone else is standing at 3 o'clock, they're at a right angle to you. If they move 1 mile farther from you, they're moving 1 mile straight down from your horizon. So that right there proves it, but people can't see it. And the point I wanted to make is, when you're looking at the horizon, if it drops 8, if the formula is miles squared times 8 inches, that means the horizon, if you're 6 feet tall and standing at the water's edge, should be 3 miles away. 3 miles away is 6 feet. But in fact, we could see so much farther than that in every circumstance over water. It's ridiculous. And I wanted to share one picture here to show. Maybe I'm jumping forward. We're talking about how things disappear over the horizon. Are we there yet, or do you want me to hold off on that?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, we will get to that in a moment. I guess there were a few issues that cropped up on today, so we don't plan to talk about We'll Do It Live too long today, and I'm still going through. I haven't had a chance to watch all of the show yet. I was busy today, but I've seen enough of it to know that it's given me plenty of material to work on tomorrow, so I'm not planning to spend too much time on today's episode talking about it. But there were a few things that really needed to be addressed, and one of them, somebody on the panel claims that Eric Dubai only woke up 6 months ago. And the logic here was, well, if Eric Dubai is one of the leading flat earthers and he only woke up 6 months ago, how can you trust him? And this, for me, shows just how little research some of these people have actually done. Clearly, they haven't watched Dubai's videos. Clearly, they haven't listened to the podcast that he's done. And clearly, they haven't bothered to look at his book or even his forum. I mean, there's plenty of ways that you can access his information. And if you spend even a cursory amount of time, you'd know that he's been doing this kind of work for a lot longer than 6 months. And when nobody pulled that particular panel member up for their claims, it made me think, is it the case that some of these panel members, maybe all of them, haven't actually spent any time looking at the other side? And that contrasts with what I think is good research, which is to look at as many sides as you can and properly look at them too. Don't just listen to what someone says here or what they say there, but truly look at it. If they give you a chance to ask them questions, like Dubai does on his forum, go and ask the questions. Satisfy your curiosity before you start saying, we can't trust someone because they've only been away for 6 months, when that's simply not the case. And I'm not here to promote Dubai's work. Like I said, I paid the $10. I got a copy of his book. I'm reading through it right now. I've enjoyed some of his documentaries. I don't agree with everything that he says, and there's a couple of points that he makes that I disagree with that I'm going to take up with him. But I'm going to take them up with him once I've had enough time to really read through his book, see if it is explained in his book. If I still can't get my head around it, go to his forum, read what's posted there, and if I still can't get my head around it, then I say, listen here, Eric, I've been thinking about this, and there's a problem with your model. But to sit there, having never looked at his documentaries, never read his book, never listened to his podcasts, and then come out and say, oh, he only woke up 6 months ago, and that's just patently false, I think it shows that some of the people as well-meaning as they might be, they're not really doing the research they say they are. Matrix, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, the debate's been around for several years, at least, and to put together the Flat Earth book, his Flat Earth book. I mean, it must have taken a long time because it's very, what I understand, it's very thorough, and it would take a long time. And he has his site called Atlantean Conspiracy, and he deals with other things like 9/11 and so on. He's been doing it for several years at least. So I mean, it's points like that where points like that are made, and people hear things. Oh, Eric Dubay's only been awake for 6 months. Which aren't true at all. You can see why it puts people off sometimes, and it's so easy just to, think, oh, okay, well that seems to make sense to me. I'm not going to bother looking at it, And a lot of these things are implemented by people, and there's sort of mistaken arguments, about what Eric Dubay is saying as well. I mean, using faulty arguments that he himself disagrees with. I mean. Watching the show last night, there was a couple of people who seemed to have actually done a little bit of research, and I was quite, you could hear it, you could see they'd changed their mind on a couple of things, and which I was like, okay, cool, that's cool. But overall, it seems to me that they haven't really done the research, and they just seem to be parroting the mainstream arguments, which are all very weak, most of them. I mean,
yeah, in Matrix, if I say something that you disagree with, if I give an objection that you disagree with, I encourage you, even while we're live on the air, to explain why you disagree with me. If there's something that I say that isn't true or that you don't agree with, you should say it. I'll be doing that with you and Dirth, and hopefully Dirth with us. And what interested me was on their panel with We'll Do It Live, when people were making these kinds of claims like, well, if you like your iPad, then you can't, you can't disagree with Spinning Ball, or you can't listen to Dubai because he's only been awake for 6 months. When people were making these patently absurd or false claims, nobody stopped in and said, yeah, that's not really a very strong argument. It wasn't a genuine discussion looking for the truth. It was almost like a group thinking roundtable where the plan was all to stick to a script. I don't know if that was by intention, by design, or by accident. It's very easy to get into a groupthink mode. We've all been guilty of it. And I think a lot of what happened was very much groupthink, because when people made some of these silly claims, nobody pulled them up. And for me, that was one of the biggest things I took away from the show. Dirth, I'll throw to you.
What was the question, John? I was.
Well, I'm just saying, what do you think about this idea that you, I, and Matrix, we're here tonight? It's tonight. It's almost 11 o'clock at night, Australian time, but we're here for this show. It's for a discussion. We're not all on the same point. We disagree. You guys are both pretty close to Flat Earth. I'm an agnostic. We're all here to throw around ideas and discuss and disagree and help each other, with any issues that we might have. That's the way it should be. What say you?
Absolutely. I am here to, objectively look at all claims. If I'm defending the Flat Earth, it's only because that piece of evidence supports the Flat Earth versus a round ball Earth. You have to look at it objectively. And to the earlier point that Dubay would be a shill because he's only been awake for 6 months. Does that mean that everybody that wakes up to 9/11, is a shill for their first 6 months? How long do you have to be awake before you're no longer a shill? Even if he woke up 6 months ago, which he obviously didn't, as you said, if you look at his work. When you're awake, you're awake. The longer you're awake, the more information, and substance you can put behind it. But that argument is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll move on from the We'll Do It Live show. Before we do, is there anything else that you guys wanted to get off your chest about We'll Do It Live, Matrix?
There seemed to be this they were pro NASA. They weren't really questioning NASA very much, and at some point they didn't want to talk about NASA. And NASA is a very important part of the debate of the Earth, because you can't really prove 100% the Earth is a sphere without NASA and their photos and videos and their alleged space programs. So it's a really important part of the discussion. Another thing that seemed to be apparent was that they kept saying how science is the truth. You can't question science. You shouldn't distrust science. And yet at the same time they also mentioned how sometimes science is manipulated. There was lots of contradictions on that show. We could break it down, or analyze every aspect of the discussion. So, I mean, I'd like to discuss it further, but I mean, we can.
Well, just on that, Matrix, you talk about science. Let me read out something. I've been putting together a script for a video that I'm doing for my channel about all the skepticism. Let me just read something out very briefly. For the sake of simplicity, the scientific method, as I understand it, is generally meant to be something like this. When we're trying to explain physical properties or phenomena, we ought to put forward theories which are falsifiable. If a theory is not falsifiable, then it's generally not considered to be scientific, which is what makes science distinct from faith-based belief systems. Now, once we have our falsifiable theories, we then attempt to falsify them by testing to see if they account for empirical observations and whether or not they can be used to make accurate predictions. If the theory is falsified, then naturally it has to be rejected, although it is natural for a theory to go through revisions until a working model is found. Now, even when a working model is found, this is still expected to go through further scrutiny, particularly as newer methods for scrutinizing the theory become available. And this is how science is supposed to work. And it's why anybody who tells you not to question a scientific theory, such as spinning ball model or flat model, anyone who tells you not to question them is already revealing themselves to be, at best, misguided on what science actually is, especially in this day and age where we have amazing technology available to everyday people. Thanks to things like telescopes and long-range cameras, even the layman can now perform simple experiments to test the spinning ball model for himself. And not only is questioning models good science, it is also the best way for you to learn things, which is why I strongly encourage people to question anything they already believe, because the worst case scenario is you come away with better reasons for believing what you already believed, and you might come away with a changed perspective. And Matrix, you and I have discussed this before. If people love the spinning ball model, that's fine. By researching it, by trying to attack it, by trying to falsify it, then all you're going to do is learn more about the spinning ball model that you already believe in. If it's true, you'll just find more evidence to believe it. Each time you try and attack it, you'll realize that the attacks are false. For instance, if you hear myself and Matrix and Dearth talking about the Bedford level experiments, rather than simply saying, well, that was 100 years ago and blah, 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 if you say, well, I'm going to prove those guys on the ballless skeptic wrong, I'm going to go and do the experiment myself and show that it doesn't work that way, or I'll try and do the maths myself and show they can't be right, then, hey, what's going to happen? Either you'll find that we are right, and hopefully you'll start to see where we're coming from, or you'll prove us wrong, post a video up and embarrass us. But do the research yourself, do the maths yourself. Dearth, you see where I'm coming from?
Absolutely. I'd love to talk more about the Bedford level experiment and the experiment that Jeranism YouTuber is going to be doing with a laser.
Okay, well, I'd love to discuss more about the Jeranism laser aspect. Did you say that Jeranism is on the way?
He said he might join, but I'm not sure if he's coming. So I sent him a link. If he pops in, that would be great.
All right, then. Well, just quickly on the scientific method, Matrix, I'll get your opinion, and then we'll move on to finally discussing some of the problems with the ball earth theory. When I say that I think that we should question all models, you get where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's about seeking out the truth. No subject is taboo. Like they want us, to think the flat Earth subject is a taboo subject. No subject should be off the table for research, serious investigative research. I mean, we're questioning our reality. Every aspect of our reality and where we are is one of them. So it's a really important thing to do. The scientific method itself is really about performing experiments to get to the truth. Science doesn't represent truth. It's about the method itself, and trying to discover, trying to know the truth. So
absolutely. And the thing is, with the scientific method, your theory is supposed to be falsifiable, and it's supposed to be able to make predictions. Okay, then, well, take gravity, for instance, and we might get time to talk about gravity later in the show, but take gravity, for instance. How exactly are you supposed to falsify that theory? How on earth are you supposed to take, doing a scientific experiment with an object with enough mass, in a scientific environment, and then see if things orbit around it? I mean, they even admit that, so-called astrophysicists fully admit that we can't recreate that on Earth. They fully admit that. So their own model is one that is unfalsifiable, at least so far as I can see it. Now, if someone disagrees with me, that's fine. Then show me how we can falsify that theory. Show me how you can make predictions with it and falsify it. And if you can't, why are you so certain that gravity is scientific? We might talk more about that later. But let's move on now to the fourth topic for tonight, and that's actually looking at some of our problems with the spinning ball model. And Matrix, I know that the Coriolis effect came up on last night's show. It's one of your favourite topics, so why don't you get us started? Explain to the listeners what the Coriolis effect is supposed to be, and then explain why you have some problems with it.
The Coriolis effect, which is also known as the curiously named and titled the fictitious force, is an effect, an alleged effect that occurs due to the Earth's spinning and how the air would be displaced and how the Earth is spinning below the air, the atmosphere. And there's a big contradiction. When you look into the Coriolis effect, as they mentioned correctly mentioned, like the water down plug holes is a myth and so on being put out there, and most people have heard of it, and this sort of elements of programming that have been drilled into us. When you start to look at the Coriolis effect, you start to wonder, well, if things like sniper bullets can move because the Earth is spinning underneath the bullet that's in the air, then how come planes that fly from east to west or west to east don't have dramatically different flight times? We know a plane going one way would get to its destination much faster, and the plane going the other way would never get to its destination. So there's this big contradiction, because they want to say that the plane thing doesn't happen because the atmosphere is fixed to the planet and held in by gravity and so on. Yet at the same time, they want to argue that sniper bullets will deflect due to the spinning Earth beneath it. And the Earth is supposed to spin.
I hate to interrupt you there, Matrix, but can I just expand on that? You and I both know the Coriolis effect, whether we believe it or not. We know what the theory is because we've read a lot about it. But for those who aren't aware, basically you're supposed to be spinning at roughly 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, and that's how the Earth does its spin in one day. At the equator, you're spinning at roughly 1,000 miles an hour, but as you move further north or south from the equator, then your speed is going less and less, because at the poles, in theory, you're not traveling any distance at all. You're just spinning around on a spot. So the idea with the Coriolis effect is, suppose I'm a sniper, I'm on the equator, and I'm shooting due north. The bullet that I shoot will be traveling, sideways, if you like, at 1,000 miles an hour, because that's the speed that I was spinning at when I shot the bullet. But by the time it reaches its target, it's gotten to a part of the Earth that isn't spinning quite as fast. And even though it might only be a slight difference, the theory goes that that'll be enough to put the bullet off its marker, and so that should mean that you have to aim accordingly. And so imagine it in your head, you're on one of those merry-go-rounds, and you pass a ball to someone. You have to aim in front of where they're going to be, because if you just roll it to where you think they are, the ball will roll off. Now, we know that that's true with merry-go-rounds, but it's not so clear that that's true with the spinning ball. So I hope that makes sense to the listeners. If it doesn't, then just go and look at the Coriolis effect, the videos for it on YouTube. That's the basic idea behind it, that because we have Coriolis on Earth, because snipers have to change their targeting, that means that we must be on a spinning ball, and so that proves the theory. That's the official story, Matrix, and your response to that is?
Yeah, well, it's a big contradiction. I mean, they like to have it both ways. 1 minute the Earth is spinning beneath the bullet, and then the next minute, the atmosphere is fixed to the Earth. To try and debunk the plane argument. The more we get into the Coriolis effect, you're looking at the storms, the alleged rotation of storms, and so on. And people like to provide graphics of that, which appear to be like really bad CGI. The storm rotation is something to be looked into more. But can we trust things from alleged satellites that perhaps don't exist? And the imaging is very, very suspect. But besides it's just one big contradiction when they use the sniper rifle argument against the planes thing, how the planes move. So it's when you look at it, this really is a fictitious force, and they like to use the example of a merry-go-round spinning beneath a ball that is in the atmosphere, not fixed to the merry-go-round. And they like to use these tricks and as examples of the Coriolis effect, and it's just not really seen on Earth. I mean, if according to when I looked it up, the Earth is moving at 465 meters per second. So if you're firing a bullet, you should miss if it takes a second to reach its distance, its target over like 1,000 meters or something like that. You should miss your target by 465 meters. Not by a couple of inches here and there. And when
let me jump in on that. Let me interrupt you there. The theory, and I could lean towards this, is that when you shoot the bullet is traveling at that speed, so it's preserving some of that momentum in the direction of the Earth, and that it slows down because the Earth, it doesn't no longer have the spinning of the Earth going, so maybe it only moves a little bit. But my question is, if you're standing in Texas and you shoot north, right, and let's just say Texas is spinning faster than locations north, that speed, the bullet should curve to the left towards California because it's going faster than the northern parts. But the official story of what the Coriolis is says that it'll go to the right, and maybe I'm just dyslexic, but it makes no sense to me.
All right, well, let me jump in there. So my impression with the Coriolis effect is it makes sense in theory until you consider the fact that not only are you going that 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, and by the way, we're just rounding the terms there, just say 1,000 miles an hour for argument's sake. Not only are you going at that speed, but so in theory is the atmosphere. The reason why you can fly a plane from west to east and east to west is because in theory the atmosphere, this is their story, is velcroed onto the Earth. So the air spins with the Earth, okay? Now that has its own problems, but even if we go with that, then what should happen is when you shoot that bullet north from the equator, then if they're being consistent, as the bullet's traveling, so too does the air moving along with the Earth, so too does that slow down. So if they're going to say that the reason why planes can fly west to east and east to west is because the atmosphere goes along with the bullet, then how come that doesn't apply to shooting a bullet with the Coriolis effect as well? They have to be consistent here. They can't have one and not the other matrix.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just an easy to understand contradiction, and yet they keep repeating the same argument as like one of the most strongest proofs. I mean, even when I've seen sniper videos where they show the documentation, and it's such a minimal effect. And even over like 10,000 meters, 10 kilometers, the effect is minimal, according to official, ballistics manuals. And any slight variation in targeting could be attributed to other things like magnetism, wind, various dynamics of each individual bullet, the gun, how the wind's blowing into the barrel or whatever. And there's all kinds of possibilities to explain, consistent missing left or right. They even showed a video last night where the guy specifically states it's because the Earth is moving underneath the bullet, right? So, and in that video, he also mentions how his experiment didn't quite show the exact results he was looking for. Getting to a point of like, it's just a massive contradiction. It's not observable. The Earth spinning like that.
Yeah, and look, I've been looking at the Coriolis effect. Like I said, I've been looking into this flat Earth theory for months now. And when I first heard of the Coriolis effect, I thought, well, there you go. That's it. That's flat Earth debunked, right? Like it made sense to me. But I thought I'll look into it further. And it took me a while to get my head around what they really meant by Coriolis. Then it took me a little while doing my research to find out, is it actually true that snipers try to account for it? And I've heard conflicting reports on that. Then it took me a little while. I had to look at the counter-arguments for it. I thought, well, what do the flat earthers say? And oftentimes I find this is the best way to look at things, is to say, well, That's what you're saying disproves them. How do they counter it? If their counter is terrible, then we're probably onto something here. So I went to look at the counter arguments, and it took me a while to get my head around their counter arguments. But I'm at the point now where I think to myself, Coriolis effect is not a very good argument for spinning ball. It doesn't work because of the contradictions. Either okay, so let me just explain this one more time. If I shoot north from the equator, then the atmosphere that bullet's going to go through is going to have its own sideways momentum as it slows down. Okay, so it'd be like shooting into a wind, and that wind would go the complete opposite way of supposedly where my bullet's going to go due to Coriolis. So why don't they cancel each other out, or why isn't the formula more complicated than it is? And then, if we're going with what snipers do, then find out how much do snipers supposedly account for Coriolis, if at all, and how does that compare to how much do they account for curvature? Because if they're shooting a bullet a mile, then straight away, in theory, they should have 8 inches of curvature, or 8 inches of drop. Do they account for that? Now, I'm not pretending to have the answers. I haven't been trained in sniper shooting. But when I hear people saying, well, we can just base this all on snipers, I say, okay, let's do that. Let's look at what snipers really do. And if it turns out that the snipers are accounting for gravity but not for curvature, will you change your mind about using snipers as a proof for the spinning ball? Dirth, I'll throw to you.
It's if you're shooting, you made a statement at which I'm not sure I understand. You said if you're shooting north, the Coriolis effect should completely be the opposite, but it's a sideways effect. You're shooting into a slowing wind, which I don't agree with, and that's going to curve the bullet. It doesn't make sense to me.
What I'm saying is, okay, so what they're saying is, with the Coriolis effect, if you shoot north, then the bullet is from the equator. The bullet already has a sideways movement of 1,000 miles an hour, but the target that you're shooting at has a speed of, say, 999 point something miles per hour. So over the time it takes your bullet to get to them, your bullet has had more sideways movement than they have because they're still affixed to the earth. That's what they're saying. But the problem is that, according to their theory, the air that's spinning around with them is also going slower. So the change of that speed of the atmosphere that the bullet goes through should also affect where the bullet ends up. And those two forces should counteract one another. They'll be affecting the bullet's sideways movement in opposite directions, or at least that's my understanding. Now, I've thought through this a few times. I could easily be wrong about this, and if I am, I'd love for someone to point it out. But right now, all I'm hearing from people is, oh, Coriolis effect, so we must be on a spinning ball, and I'm not sure that they've really thought through it. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And if you're shooting, let's say the maximum distance, I don't know how far they shoot. Is it 3 miles? 3 miles. What is the actual difference in speed? And could there be a breeze that completely negates that? Somewhere in that 3 miles. Winds go left and right. Within yards of each other. Sometimes. Little wind pockets. So it's really difficult to quantify that. I've been leaning towards, and need to do a lot more research, that it's the magnetism that is spinning things. There could be magnetism that pulls on organic matter. There is that accounts for forces that we're just unaware of.
Well, we can speculate about the magnetism later in the show, but for now, I really want to nut out this Coriolis effect thing. Matrix, have you got any more that you want to add to this part of the show?
Yeah, well, I just like to say it's a simple contradiction that they've got going on there. If you're firing a bullet over land, no matter how fast it's going, and say that a bullet travels at a fairly decent speed over 1,000 meters or 2,000 meters or what have you. The Earth is still supposed to be spinning underneath that bullet at 465 meters per second. So if that bullet's in the air for a second, from the direction it's fired in, the target would have moved 465 meters if the Earth was spinning at that speed. And they want to have it both ways. The atmosphere is fixed to explain the planes. Yeah, it's moving for the sniper rifle stuff. I mean, it's such an easy concept to understand once you start to think about it.
All right. So sorry, I hate to interrupt you there, Matrix. Can you see my paint here?
I did for a minute, and it's disappeared now.
I see it. It's up.
All right, so maybe it disappears when I'm speaking, but let me try and explain this. Because, look, Matrix, you say it's easy. Maybe you're a bit smarter than me. It took me a while to get my head around this. If you imagine that that middle line is the equator and that this line is where you're shooting your bullet to. So this arrow represents where you're shooting, where your sniper's shooting. They're shooting north. Imagine that from the line that you're shooting on, you're spinning at 1,000 miles an hour because you're on the equator. Imagine that your target, for argument's sake, is on a parallel, but they're going slower because they're further north, because up here it's 0. They're going at 999 miles an hour. So when you think you're shooting straight at them, imagine that's a straight line, by the time your bullet hits them, you've traveled a little bit further than they have. So your bullet has a sideways movement this way. Does that make sense? That's what the Coriolis effect says. So you have to counter that by shooting down at an angle. The only problem is that your atmosphere is also going at 1,000 miles an hour with you, which is why you don't notice it. But your target, relative to your bullet, has a speed that means that it's almost like having a wind going this way, which is the exact way that you're supposed to counteract the Coriolis effect. So if it's the case that what I just said is true, that their atmosphere is spinning less fast than yours is, so by the time the bullet reaches them, it's actually had a force that way. If that's the case, then how come that doesn't counteract the so-called Coriolis effect? And if, let's find the eraser thing, if that isn't true what I just said, if the speed, the sideways speed of imagine like wind, okay, the force would be something like wind. If that doesn't affect the flight of the bullet, okay, then how come planes can fly east to west and west to east when it's supposed to be Velcro theory that keeps the atmosphere like stable above the Earth that it's on? Does that explanation make sense?
Well, I can't see your graphic, unfortunately.
Oh, you should have said something. I was on a roll.
Click on his picture. Click on his picture, Matrix. Does that help? Oh, he just stopped sharing.
I think it came up on the show anyway. Sorry, Matrix, that you didn't get to see it. But look, here's the thing. What I just presented, I could be completely wrong. I've tried to think through it. This is what I've come up with. And if I'm wrong, people can help me by explaining how I'm wrong. But simply saying, oh, I know some guys in the Marines or you know, snipers, just saying that doesn't really help. Let's sit down and work through the maths. And if I am wrong about this, that's fine by me. I like admitting when I'm wrong. You know, but right now, the more I think through this Coriolis thing, the more absurd it seems. And also, like I said, I've tried to find different sources online that talk about, do snipers actually try to account for Coriolis? And I've found a few sources that say that they do. I've found a few sources that say that they don't. So I'm doing my best to look through this, but this is how this kind of research is meant to be done collaboratively. If I'm wrong, if I've made an error there with my conceptual framework of how this works, someone explain it to me, and between us, we can come to a satisfactory conclusion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a really simple thing to work out. I mean, it takes a bit of a while to sort of study the Coriolis effect, I guess, you know, to come to terms with how fraudulent it is. And they literally call it the fictitious force. And they use examples like kids on roundabouts throwing a ball, you know, which demonstrates that the ball isn't fixed like an atmosphere would be. You know, they like to use these illusions, and they like to show like diagrams of planes being deflected. You know, if you throw a paper airplane north, it will go one way or the other because of the spin, and then we don't see that with planes at all in the sky. You know, it's a very once you start looking at it and questioning, you know, how if 1 minute they're saying the atmosphere is moving above the ground, you know, the ground's moving below the bullet, and the next minute they're saying, well, you know, it doesn't affect planes in the same way. Much bigger objects that fly for a much longer time in the air. It doesn't affect those things because the atmosphere is fixed. So they can't have it both ways. It's just a big contradiction to the Coriolis effect itself. You know, if the Coriolis effect was true, planes would be going all over the place, finding it difficult to land, you know, flown off course. They'd be flying up into the sky, going one way, up into space, and they'd be crashing into the Earth the other way. If they were flying east to west or west to east, and you know, going way off course as they fly north or south, and this doesn't happen. And you know, they want to have it both ways. It's like other arguments to do with, like, you know, boats disappearing over the horizon, you know, and then, you know, all of a sudden things like the Chicago skyline is a superior mirage that explains how it's, it should be like 1,000 feet. The top of the Sears Tower, which is 1,000+ feet, should be 1,000 feet below the horizon. Yeah, they like to explain that with their superior mirage. They like to have it both ways. It's either, it's a kind of either one or the other, and they can't make up their minds. I mean, the Coriolis effect is a real obvious one once you start to think about it.
Well, Matrix, we've got, I hate to interrupt you there, mate. We've got 50 people watching live in the live chat. High Off Truth says, JLB, don't draw when you're buzzed. And I do admit that my paint drawing skills are pretty pathetic, but I hope that what I said makes sense. Matrix, let me throw one to you. I did hear what I thought was an okay point the other day, though. Someone said, well, how about Coriolis when it affects hurricanes? Now, I've heard one person argue that you can actually find hurricanes or typhoons or whatever you guys call them, cyclones, you know what I'm saying? They've got different words for it, but you know what I'm saying? These big storms. The counter-argument I heard was actually you can find them spinning in the wrong way in different hemispheres. Now, I haven't had time to disprove that or to prove it, but if we can't disprove, like if it is the case that all hurricanes spin one way in the northern hemisphere and the other way in the southern hemisphere, how would you explain that on a flat Earth? Like, what would be your reply to that?
Well, I think that it's another aspect of the Coriolis force, like so similar to water down plug holes. I believe it's a myth. I think we're being shown CGI images from space, alleged space, from satellites, which I don't believe can really exist in the thermosphere or in the vacuum of space or whatever. I don't believe in that. I think the Rothschilds run all the weather, if not at least 60% of all the weather stations. And they own the weather. People would put out the weather news and weather forecasts and all that. And it just looks like CGI to me. Really bad CGI. So if it was the case, then if it was truly the case, it'd be hard to verify and for people to measure that. And we're really having to rely on the authorities to believe that. But when we look at the Coriolis effect overall, it's nonsense. It really is a myth, something put out there to reinforce their globe Earth, spinning ball Earth narrative. And and we've been indoctrinated with it. And so the storm thing is just another addition to that, which we can't really prove.
All right, then, Dirth, I'll throw that to you. Dirth, look, obviously the satellite photos are fake. I mean, we can all agree with that. It's ridiculous, but maybe they can track the direction of cyclones or hurricanes. That's the word, cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons. Maybe they can track them through radar, because I think radar is real. I just think satellites are nonsense. But if we could prove the way that these storm systems spin through radar, and if it was the case that they all spin one way in one hemisphere, the other way in the other hemisphere, would that be a strong objection to the flat Earth model?
I'm definitely not an expert on the Coriolis effect, but there does seem to be a force that spins these storms. I've been in several hurricanes and have watched the damage as the eye passes over and then the winds change direction. So there is a spin, and is it because of the spin of the Earth? It doesn't make any sense to me. I think there's other forces out there. I think there are electromagnetic forces that spin the Earth. If you ever look at iron shavings and magnetic fields, you'll see that they curve around. They create a torus, where they spin one way on one end and another way on the other. So, if the Earth is flat and we are on top of a giant, flat magnet, and yes, flat magnets do exist. Probably look at your refrigerator; you could probably find one. There is a northern and southern, spin that go in opposite directions. So
for me, Dirth, here's the thing. I haven't looked into this far enough to know if it is true that these big storm systems all spin one way in one hemisphere and all. What the hell is that?
I don't know. Oh, was that me?
Yeah, I think that was you. Yeah, here's the thing. I haven't looked into it far enough to disprove that notion that they all spin one way in one hemisphere, one way in the other hemisphere. But here's the thing. If you could find even one storm system that did spin the so-called wrong way, that would disprove that objection. But secondly, even if they do all spin the right way for Coriolis, it doesn't prove that that's the spinning ball doing it. There are other explanations. For instance, on an Eric Dubai's flat Earth model, which I've already said I'm not convinced of yet, but I'm working through his stuff, I'm slowly getting there. With his system, the sun rotates around a relatively set path. It could easily be explained, and I'm not going to even try with paint right now, but if people think through this, the sun moving in the circle that it does could easily explain storms on one side of the sun moving one way and storms on the other side moving the other way. What I'm trying to say here is that even if you could prove that, it doesn't, the cyclones thing, even if you could prove that, that doesn't necessarily mean ball Earth model is true, because other models can still explain it. And that's, I think, an important thing for people to understand. If someone says to you, I've just shown you something and that proves my model, you should still think, like, first you should think, does it prove your model? Does it prove that does it fit into your model? But secondly, can other models explain it? And oftentimes with the people who are 100% spinning ball, which obviously many people are, they're 100% spinning ball, it can't be anything else. Oftentimes the explanations they give for spinning ball might fit into spinning ball, but they just as easily and sometimes better fit into the flat model matrix. I'll throw to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's about applying it, all the various arguments to different models and seeing which one fits the best. I mean, I've seen, I think Dave Deepens on the rabbit hole put a video out about a weather map, you know, and you can track the currents, the water currents, and the heat temperature, and how it flows around a flat Earth model and the globe Earth model. And you know, if you put it on the flat Earth model, azimuthal equidistance map, you know, it seems to make much more sense. But you've got, you know, around the outside it's going one way, on the inside it's going a different way, and this could be due to like how the sun and moon are located, to magnetic forces, to rising and cooling temperatures. You know, different aspects come into play, and it's, you know, these things seem to make more sense when you're looking at the azimuthal equidistant flat Earth map, and how it works on there. So, I mean, for me, you know, the Coriolis effect is a myth, and if it was true, snipers would be missing their targets by 465 meters per second, and planes would be going in different directions at different speeds, and so on and so forth, which doesn't happen. So really, the whole, and water down plug holes, that's another one. You know, it's a myth. It doesn't happen consistently, and I think the same thing applies. I've heard it applies to the hurricane spin direction as well. It's not consistent, you know, but they like to make out that it is. I mean, with the water down plug holes thing, you know, going in different directions and different hemispheres, as they like to put it out, and they've even taught it in schools. But now, you know, you can go to various, like Wikipedia or Library of Congress or various science sites, and they will tell you that it's a myth. It's not easy. It's not consistent. And there's some trickery involved when demonstrations like that are done. And you know, to actually really measure the water down the plug holes in different directions, you have to let the water rest for one whole day, so there's no motion or no disturbance to the way the water is going to flow. And even then, the experiment you have to set up has to be so impossibly precise, so that when you pull out the plug, you don't encourage you to go one direction or the other. You know, one little deviation one way when you pull the plug will send it going in that direction. So they say that on Wikipedia. That's the experiment they set up to apparently prove the Coriolis effect.
All right, then, I'll tell you what, I do want to, Matrix, I hate to interrupt. I do apologise. I have interrupted a lot tonight, but we've got heaps to get through in the 2 hours, so please forgive me. Dirth, any final thoughts on Coriolis?
No, but as you were saying a moment ago, that you could observe things differently. You know, one of the guys from We'll Do It Live made a video that you're aware of that said that this view of the moon that you can all see is it can only work on a flat ball, because you see it from different perspectives in different hemispheres, but it works perfectly on a flat Earth too. You know, it's not.
Well, I tell you what. I promise we'll come to that, but I'm just trying to keep each of our topics distinct tonight. So with the Coriolis, again, my understanding of it could be wrong. The best way to correct me is to make a video and show how you think it works. And let's again, let me just make this point again. I don't pretend that I know exactly how the whole thing works. I'm far from that point. And the best way for us to help each other is to do exactly that, to show how other people are wrong politely and respectfully. So I hope, if I am wrong, that people do that, within a week. And if they do, I'll come on this show next week and say I was wrong. Now, before we move on to the next topic, let me just show this map, because I know that most of you by now have probably looked into Mark Sargent and Eric Dubai, and you've got some idea of the Flat Earth map. But I found it interesting today that, at least in the parts of Will Do It Live that I've seen, I haven't seen the whole thing, so please don't misquote me or get me wrong here, but I saw them showing a lot of other maps to sort of represent the Flat Earth model, but they're maps that I haven't actually seen anyone actually claiming are real. This one is the one that I've seen most people going with. Some of them think it might be a bit different to this, but this is a general rough idea. And the theory is, if you can see my cursor there going around, that's what happens. The cursor goes around. So what I'm saying with Coriolis is, if it is the case on the Flat Earth, like this is the Flat Earth model, if it is the case that hurricanes spin one way in one hemisphere and the other way in the other hemisphere, that could easily be because the northern hemisphere, which is on this side of the cursor, the energy from the sun gets to one side of the hurricane before it gets to the other, and that creates a circle. Meanwhile, those on the southern hemisphere, it gets the energy from the other side. Do you see what I'm saying? Now, that might not be the case, but the point I'm making is, even on this Flat Earth model, you could explain hurricanes going one way in one hemisphere and the other way in the other hemisphere, if indeed they do. Now, we've got a lot of people in the live chat. They're asking us to focus on other things as well. I promise we've got more topics to talk about. And Dirth, you've been a bit quiet tonight, so I'll let you get the next one rolling, and that's to do with the moon and the perspective of the moon. Do you have that image ready to do a screen share for us?
Yeah, give me 10 seconds to get it.
Well, I'll tell you what, while you get it lined up, Matrix, the perspective of the moon is an interesting one. The moon itself is a fascinating topic, and it's one of the ones that I've still got so much more research to do, but one aspect of it is easy to get our heads around, and that is, people say, well, you see the moon, it looks one way in the northern hemisphere, it looks the opposite way in the southern hemisphere. That proves ball Earth. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, the argument that they used on the show last night, which was debunked by someone, Leslie Needham, explained it. It's just if you're on a flat model and you're standing at the center, the North Pole, on the flat map, and you're looking south, and the moon is, let's just say, around the equator area, equatorial region, and you're looking at it, and someone in the southern hemisphere, the southern pole, for instance, is looking north at the same moon, you get the same result that they show in that diagram. You're just seeing it from two different perspectives. But, you could do the same with, if you have two people standing in a room and you have a ball, some kind of ball with a pattern on it. The person on one side will see it from one way, and the other person on the other side will see it from the other. So, that argument is easily disproven, and Dave's about to show that diagram, I think.
All right, Dave, this can be your topic, mate. Take it away. Looks like he's done a runner on us. Has he got that up? Where is he?
I have it up. I had my mute on, and I was saying some profound things that will forever be lost. Can you guys see the picture?
Yep.
All right, so I just want to say that there's people out there that are going to start screaming bloody murder about this, that it can't be real because we only see one side of the moon. This is way out of perspective. Put that moon much higher, put the guys closer. You're seeing essentially the same side of the moon, but just from a different perspective. For a simple example, just glue a beach ball to the ceiling in your room, put an arrow on it facing one end of the room and stare at it, and then walk to the southern hemisphere, other end of your room, and look at it, and the arrow is pointing away from you. It just changes your perspective. Works perfectly on a flat Earth, works pretty perfectly on a round Earth. So, there's these people out there that are out there screaming, I have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt there's no way that this can be done on a flat Earth. It just shows their lack of thought and their deep programming into round ball Earth theory.
So you've been sitting on the sidelines for minutes waiting to jump in, and then you say everything you have to say in 30 seconds. Come on, give us a bit more than that. Go into a bit more detail. Basically, they're trying to say you see it from one perspective on one hemisphere, the other perspective on the other hemisphere. It proves a ball, but it doesn't prove a ball at all. You could have a disc on. Okay, suppose you're in a room, in a square room with your friends. You're sitting on against one wall, your friend's sitting against the other wall, and there's a disc on your ceiling, and it has a smiley face. To one of you, it looks like the smiley face is looking at you. To the other one, it looks like it's an upside down smiley face. I mean, this.
That's because you're sitting in a round ball room on a sphere, right? It's the only way it could work, according to according to other people. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's a horrible argument, and I know that's why I did it in 30 seconds. It's not worth discussing anymore because anybody with half a brain can see it.
All right, then, Matrix, you get the final word on the moon perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the moon is, what is the moon? I mean, we really don't know what the moon is. I mean, we've been told fed a bunch of rubbish about the Apollo missions landing on the moon. You know, it seemed to be last night they were on the We'll Do It Live. They were defending a whole NASA program, you know, almost without question. And you know, we really don't know what the moon is. You know, we don't know what its real properties are. If you know, if whether gravity, you know, gravity appears to be it appears to be a nonsense of science as well. I mean, it's easily explained by density. I mean, there's lots of absurdities to the whole gravitational thing. We don't really know how the moon works. I mean, there's other things about, you know, the moon has its own light. It really doesn't reflect the sunlight for its light.
I'd like to jump in on that.
There's various different possibilities of what the moon is and how it behaves and why we see only one side of the moon. You know, when you look at the photos of the moon, you know, people like to say, oh, you can see some shadows in some of the craters on the bottom. But the overall sphere, you know, if it was a sphere, a genuine sphere, we'd be seeing diffused light. So there would be a hot spot on the light, and as it goes around the sides, there would be the gradual diffusion of light, and you know, into darkness. But we don't see that with the photos of the moon. We just see some dodgy-looking craters at the bottom of the moon that have a little bit of shadow in them, which, you know, if it was a sphere, you know, we'd see much more diffusion of light. So the moon itself is still a mystery, as is the sun, as are the so-called planets and the stars that we see.
So I have an experiment that everybody can do. You know, get a spotlight and get a model of the Earth and get a scalable model of the moon. Remember that and take the light, which is the sun, and put it 400 feet away, all right, and then shine that light at the model of the Earth, which is in scale to the size of the moon, and rotate that around, rotate the moon around the Earth. When we have a full moon, we should have total lunar eclipses most of the time. How is the moon completely lit up by the sun as it's going around the opposite side of the Earth, mostly on the plane? You know, occasionally we have a lunar eclipse, very occasionally, and I don't know how to explain what that is yet. But in reality, every time we have a full moon, we should have a minimum of a major partial eclipse, if not a complete eclipse, at some point during the night. And
Dirth, I hate to interrupt you. I think the official explanation of that is that because the sun is so big that even if the moon's sort of path around the Earth is even slightly off a perfect 90 degrees, that it rises up enough because it's so far away that it still gets the sun rays. And if you look into Dubai's work, he explains how every time somebody came along with an objection like yours, the so-called scientists simply lengthened the distance between the Earth and the sun and the moon. So at one point it was a few thousand miles away, then it was a few million miles away, and now the stars are light years away. They had to create this whole new distance to explain things. And like I think the official story can explain your objection, but only because the official story now says that the sun is, what is it, 100 million miles away? Like some
93 million.
Does that make sense?
I mean, it's a explanation that's hard to disprove, but you know, if you get a model and do it to scale, 400 feet to 1 feet, because 1 foot, because the sun is 400 times farther away, you will see that there's a major shadow from the Earth, and we would have eclipses all of the time. So.
Look, I get you. I fully get you, and I do not accept that the sun is like such a far distance away. How on earth can you possibly prove that without taking other aspects of the heliocentric model for granted? In other words, circular reasoning begging the question. I'm with you. I don't agree that the sun or the moon is that far away, or at least I don't agree that they can prove it's anything like that. All I'm saying is that the ball Earth model, I think, can explain your objection, but I could be wrong. I mean, we can look into that one further. Let me just show. Can you guys see my screen here with the sun and the moon and the flat Earth?
Yep.
All right. Yep. So I noticed one of the members of We'll Do It Live said that, you know, how on the flat Earth model. And please, if I'm misrepresenting them, I apologize. But the way that I took what they said was that even on a flat Earth model, how come me down here in Brisbane on the east coast of Australia, even on a flat Earth model, how come I would see a different moon image to someone in the northern hemisphere? But if you take even 10 seconds to look at this photo, it's obvious why. On the flat Earth model, I'm on one side of that hypothetical room I mentioned earlier, and someone in the northern hemisphere is on the other side. And because on most flat Earth models, the moon and the sun rotate around something close to the equator between the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer, then at most times, people like me in the southern hemisphere will always be on one side, and people in the northern hemisphere will always be on the other side. Does that make sense? So, like, some of the objections to flat Earth, and like I said, I've got objections to flat Earth, which are based on the moon. We'll talk about them later. But some of the objections that were offered came from people who either haven't actually taken the time to look at Eric Dubai's forum or read his book, and not just Dubai, there's others as well. Some of the objections either came from people who haven't actually looked at the flat Earth model properly, or from people who have but are misrepresenting the model. And with that said, I think it's time for us to move on. The next topic that we wanted to talk about was space. And Dirth, since you've been quiet, the topic of space is very important to the flat Earth model and to the spinning ball model. In fact, it's important to every model. Does space exist? Does it not? And with the spinning ball model, we're supposed to believe there's this thing called space. It's a vacuum or pretty close to a vacuum. You can fly rockets through it. You can put satellites in it. And I found it very interesting that our friends at We'll Do It Live, they didn't really want to talk about some of the problems with space. What say you?
So I'm glad you mentioned satellites and space. And I'm leaning towards Matrix's view that there are no satellites as we understand them. But you can see, and I believe I said this on the last show, you can see these things cruising across the sky that don't have flashing lights on them, that are going at incredible speeds and are predictable, that we're told are satellites. But again, it's the same objection I have with the moon, but even better, because they're way closer, way smaller. They would be eclipsed by the Earth's shadow all the time. At nighttime, from late night, to the wee hours in the morning, when the sun is on the other side of the planet, because the sun is so far away and they are literally just off the surface, like a microbe, where they would be in the shadow the whole time and we would not see their reflection. So if satellites are real, which I'm not sure if they are, I'm leaning towards that they aren't, it doesn't work on a round ball model, but it does work on a flat model if somehow they are perhaps quantumly locked into space, but they're by man or other forces, and they could reflect the sun if they were extremely shiny and angled towards us in the right direction all the time. But it doesn't make any sense on a round ball Earth.
Matrix.
Yeah, I mean, the debate really is about what we can see from space. What are we seeing? What does the Earth look like? Why aren't there photos? Why aren't there videos? With all these missions to Mars, and they can send probes here and everywhere. They got all these satellites up there. Yet we struggle to get any pictures of Earth. I mean, it's a big part of the puzzle, and people's unwillingness to go there, unwillingness to question the moon landings, regarding the pictures of Earth. It's a big part of it. ISS, the International Space Station, the absurdities that take place upon the space station. I mean, I've seen the space station fly over here early in the morning, just before sunrise, and it appears, it appears to be something. It looks like there's something there, and it seems to be traveling very slowly across the sky. It doesn't equatable to something like a plane or something like that, plane speed. It doesn't seem to be going 17,500 miles an hour whizzing across the sky. I know it's further away, allegedly, but it could be put down to a various number of technologies that are being used there. I mean, people like to talk about the secret space program in this community, and the advanced technologies that they have that we are not aware of. I mean, they have their holographic technologies. They may have some kind of craft that can fly up there. Who knows? Something to do with magnetism. Not anti-gravity, more like magnetic forces that change how ships fly. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities. I mean, it could be as a solar-powered drone. It could be a hologram. It's beyond even our understanding. But it appears to be a deception going on from NASA from the beginning up until today, up until the space station and the missions there. Docking with. I wonder how if something's traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, how do you dock with that? How does that work? I mean, and it seems a bit absurd at that speed. I mean, it's such an incredible speed. So there seems to be lots of problems with the ISS. I mean, they tried to show some pictures that were taken, amateur astronomer pictures through 8-inch telescopes and so on. And the best evidence I've seen so far are just these sort of blurry-ish images, not absolute proof of anything. I mean, and the same goes for the satellites. I mean, we really don't know what kind of technologies we are dealing with, and there's various contradictions in the thermosphere is supposed to be 2,500 degrees centigrade, and the materials that the satellites are made of melt at half that temperature. And they say that there's no atoms to be affected or whatever, particles, but the materials that the satellites themselves are made of those atoms and materials. So there's so much contradiction to how satellites and other space technologies can allegedly work. Traveling in a propulsion in a vacuum is just not possible. It's a false argument that they use. And last night there was an alleged astrophysicist guy on there talking about it, and he's just believing in indoctrination. I mean, when there are experiments that you can do to prove that you can't propel in a vacuum of space. So all of their missions in space seem to be completely fraudulent.
Well, Matrix, can I say with great respect, I don't think he was supposed to be an astrophysicist. I think he was supposed to be an astrophotographer, and he was an amateur astrophotographer. And I still think that's cool, by the way. I think, like, if I had the money and if I knew I was going to be living in one house for long enough, I'd love to buy a big telescope and look at the stars, especially now that I have the beliefs that I have and I have the questions that I have. I'd love to do it, so I think it's totally cool. But to use an appeal to authority that, well, this person likes to take photos of the stars, so when he says that NASA's real, you have to believe it, that to me seems like a huge logical leap. And you have to understand the official story is that there's something like, 5, 10, 13,000 satellites in space. You would think that some of them would have some convincing photos of the Earth. Now, people will say, well, why is this important? Maybe we've been lied to about space and satellites, but that doesn't mean that we're not on a ball. And I'd agree with you. The problem is that so much of our beliefs for why we should believe in the ball come from the same organization that fakes the moon landings and faking satellites, and that's NASA. So that's why this is so important. And I found it very interesting that they didn't spend more time talking about what I call the NASA hoax, but the satellite hoax, the moon landing hoax, call it whatever you want. We have been utterly lied to about what's going on up in so-called space. And if you're not willing to address that, there must be a reason. Dirth, I'll throw to you.
the problem is, if you prove that NASA is lying, the people that are holding on to their round ball beliefs and refusing to look, just ignore it. This picture I have up right here, this is a picture from the space station of the shuttle at 200 miles above, and if you could see, I have it to the same scale as this picture that Google Earth says is only a quarter of that distance, 57 miles above. Down here I have the same thing, 257 miles, this is what this 10-mile span looks like, and 200 miles, this is what it looks like. This is absolute proof that the picture on NASA's website is faked because the pod doors to the shuttle can't be opened at 57 miles up, and people just discount it. They ignore it, and it doesn't make any sense. It proves that it's fake. So lie about that. You're lying about a lot of.
We couldn't have timed it any better because we've just been joined for the final half hour of the show by allegedly Dave. So allegedly Dave on episode 2 of the Baller Skeptic Roundtable. Thanks for joining us, mate. I hate it when I do a nice intro when they can't hear me. We'll give Dave a couple of moments.
No, he's on.
Sorry, I can hear you. It's just the mute button wasn't responding to me. Yeah, thanks a lot. I got kind of hung up in other things and missed the beginning of the show. I apologise.
Oh, no need to apologise, Dave. It's good to have you here, and you couldn't have picked a better time because Dirth is just looking at some fake NASA photos, and of course, you've put together 2 45-minute videos, so a feature-length film essentially looking at the NASA hoax, and this is one of the points that you make is the photos themselves from NASA, you don't need to believe the Earth is flat to see that NASA's lying.
Oh, no. I mean, all the photos are CGI and faked. There's one in particular with of North America, and North America takes up most of the surface of, or the hemisphere, basically. You compare it to most of the others, it just doesn't match. So you can tell they're all fake.
I completely agree. Well, since you joined us late, Dave, we've actually gone through a few topics, and for other people who've joined the show late, I will just read this out. We started off the show by giving our own positions of what we actually believe the Earth is at this point in our research. We talked about the CIA's psyop meme that's being pushed to discredit people like us. We talked about what the scientific method really is, and now we're looking at some of the problems with ball Earth theory. So since you got here late, Dave, can you just give the listeners a basic idea of where you're at, and if you had to put a percentage on it, how confident you are that the Earth is flat?
I would put it around about 90 to 95% now. I still haven't been able to find any sort of definitive proof of the Sigma Octantis problem, which is the southern pole star. So at the moment, I just think it's like Walt Disney and the Lemmings, a fake story that's been taken to be true.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the point that I would make is, like I said, you don't have to question spinning ball to see that NASA are lying. So then you have to ask yourself, why would someone promoting the spinning ball refuse to properly question NASA? What is it, if anything, that they're trying to hide? I'll tell you what, we'll have to wrap up on the satellites aspect soon, but let me put a question to you guys. I'll start with you first, Matrix. Let's think about this. If you go out into the sun rays hit you, you start getting warm, and then some of that warmth radiates into the heat around you. What happens when you go to space? There's nothing to radiate that thermal energy out to, is there? I mean, you can radiate some of it through radiant, through, I guess, infrared or other aspects, but the simple thermal transfer of light won't work. And to illustrate that, think about your thermos flask, the things that you put coffee in so they stay warm. We call them thermos flasks here. I don't know what we call them over there, but probably the same thing. That they try and suck out the air in between the two layers of aluminium, because with less air in there, it's harder for heat to transfer. This is just common sense. The problem is, if space is supposed to be a vacuum or close to a vacuum, then all of the heat that hits you from the sun, it's very hard for it to go anywhere. So in theory, you should just keep on warming up hotter and hotter and hotter until a satellite becomes a molten blob. Now, I could be wrong about this, but Matrix, can you see any problems with my conceptualization of this?
No, I think you make some good points there, man. I mean, it makes definite problems with how the vacuum of space works, and how they say that they're in a vacuum on the ISS space station, and how they have heat cooling things and things to warm them up and so on. There's lots of problems with it. I mean, I like to say that on the show yesterday they mentioned about how you can't question NASA and the various space agencies. I just like to say, go and have a look at the Japanese space program on YouTube. It's called JAXA, JAXA, and check out the Earthrise videos. They have several on there, and where they have a lunar orbiter, some kind of module orbiting the moon, and they show the Earthrise, like the famous picture of Earth rising above the moon, and it's absolutely laughable. I mean, it's the worst CGI I've ever seen. I mean, maybe we could play it on the show. But I mean, I just wanted to bring that in there. How the other space agencies are also faking it 100%.
Yeah, and what's more, if people say, oh, but that's just China or that's just Japan faking it, that's not the same as America doing it. Well, hold on. A lot of the reason that people give as to why NASA can't have faked the moon landings is, wouldn't one of the other countries have called them out on it? So if you're happy to accept that China or Japan are faking a space mission, why isn't America calling them out on it? Well, the answer is obvious, because they're all on it together. And Dirth, while we're on this topic, I heard somebody say on the live on We'll Do It Live, and again, I don't want to misrepresent them, so if I misheard them, I've only listened back to some of it, but if I misheard them, I apologize. But I thought I heard someone say, how could NASA get away with it? It would take lots of people being in on the lie. Dirth, help me out here. How many people would be involved in, say, 9/11?
That's a great question. I mean, there could be thousands of people involved, but also in NASA, everything is very compartmentalized. You could literally work at NASA and not know that they're fake, because you only see, what your compartment does, and you're shown the show that everyone else is shown. But there could be, there's. I was trying to think how many people know that the Earth is not a ball, in the elite quotation marks. And I think that it's a very large number, larger than we think, and that's why everyone is playing along, because these people, again in quotation marks, that run the world, they want to keep us in control. And if we know that there's something beyond that ice wall, something extraterrestrial for using that term, Earth terrestrial life that could be just hours away, less than a day's flight on a regular plane with a large tank of fuel, we would insist that the trillions of dollars that we've given NASA get diverted for that. And as far as images from space, hey, you know what? It would pay to have a camera facing the Earth and watching it spin all of the time, 24 hours a day. And what better place to do that than on a surface that always faces the Earth? How come they haven't dropped a rover or something on the moon with a camera facing the Earth with a live stream of weather and rotation and possible threats? They haven't, because they can't, because it doesn't exist.
Why don't they give us a proper live stream from the International Space Station? Why can't we see the astronauts, more than just in these televised interviews, which could easily be faked? Why don't we get a live stream from the ISS? I mean, if the internet is based on satellites, then there can't be any problems with the internet feed, can there?
The images, the videos from the space station are truly laughable. When you're awake to looking for, the fact that they're not real. It's like, there's people that are emotional about 9/11, and but when you wake up to it, then you look back at that same imagery, you say, oh my God, how could I have been so stupid? Take a look at the NASA footage. There's so many good videos out there. Dave has his 2 videos. I think he touches on that. Jaronism does great NASA videos. Hopefully he can join us next week. If you just take the time to watch these things, it's really empowering as far as awakening to this deception.
It certainly is. Well, we need to press on. We've got a couple more topics to get through. So we'll go to Matrix and then to Dave. Any final thoughts on the space hoax? We can discuss it again next week and the week after, but just for this episode, Matrix, then Dave, final thoughts on the space hoax.
Yeah, I mean, it's so obvious when you start looking at it. I mean, I've spent hours and hours watching the International Space Station live feed on the internet, and it's just you don't see any shadows of the clouds. Only at sunrise do you see any shadows, but the rest of it, you don't see any shadows. You don't see any planes. There should be like hundreds of thousands of planes in the sky. They'll be reflecting the light of the sun. You don't see any chemtrails. There's so many problems with the footage when you look at it. And when it goes into darkness, you don't see any of the Earth lit up, and they cut away conveniently. They shut off the camera. There's so many problems with the footage. Yet you have like hundreds of thousands of people commenting and going, "Wow, it's beautiful," and you have to wonder. The indoctrination is so strong. So yeah, I mean, it's just when you start to notice it and you start to piece it all together, and it becomes quite absurd. And if the Earth was a spinning ball and there was a vacuum of space and zero gravity and all this stuff, they should be able to show it, no problem whatsoever, but they don't. They have no evidence to support it. It's all CGI, it's all fake, and it's a big part of the debate.
Dave?
Well, my question would be about space itself, the mechanics of it. I mean, if space is a vacuum, and obviously a vacuum needs to be filled, then how can a planet sit there with an atmosphere and not have its atmosphere just sucked off into this vacuum? People might say, oh, it's gravity, which is the cure-all for everything, according to the scientific mafia. But if gravity was holding the atmosphere to the Earth, well, the outer atmosphere should be being pulled in, sucked off into space, which should lessen the amount of atmosphere, which then the vacuum will start pulling on that upper atmosphere, and so on until there's no atmosphere left on Earth. It just doesn't work.
I completely agree. Well, I'll tell you what, we will have to come back to the space one again in future episodes, and we've made this point before too. If you do your own research into ball Earth skepticism, flat Earth theory, concave theory, whatever, do your own research. If you come away and you still believe in spinning ball, but you've at least realised what an utter fraud NASA is, then I would argue it's been well worth your time doing the research. Now, in the live chat, we've got about 50 people watching live. Thank you to you guys for coming out. It's been a terrific live chat, almost zero trolls. I haven't had to ban a single person yet, so thanks for your contributions. Dolores Flores says she recommends people check out Learn of the Jesuit Order. Now, I'm sure most of the people listening to this have already seen his work, but if you haven't, I couldn't recommend it more highly. Learn of the Jesuit Order. And I've heard people also saying anyone who tries to make money from their YouTube channel, anyone who has like a donate button or something, they're skeptical of. I fully understand that. We should be skeptical of all channels in the first place, including mine. But Learn of the Jesuit Order, he did this terrific thing where he actually did his own artistic paintings, and he sold them for like $100 each, and they were mocking NASA. They were terrific. I don't own many possessions. I try to own as little as I can so I can move, whenever I have to move, and I kind of feel more free that way. But if I was the kind of person to buy paintings and hang them on a wall, I would have bought one. Learn of the Jesuit Order, those paintings could be worth a lot of money in the future. So if you're not familiar with him, go and check out his work. This is what we need to do. Other people who are doing good work, check them out, promote them. When we find people doing terrific work, really make an effort to spread the word for their channel. Like maybe you don't want to make videos, maybe you don't want to do podcasts talking about the NASA hoax. That's fine. Find the people who do and try and spread the word about them. And Learn of the Jesuit Order is a classic example. People should be spreading the word about him. Now, this was meant to be a 2-hour show. We are going to have to wrap it up sometime soon, but there's a few more topics we have to get through. One of them very quickly is the boats going over the horizon. Now, Matrix, I consider you the expert on this panel about the whole horizon aspect. We've already touched on the curvature and the mathematics, but do you want to explain to people who would have seen that clip, and we'll do it live, with the boat supposedly going over the horizon, you want to explain why you think that video might not be as conclusive as it was claimed?
Okay, well, that video, is held up as one of the big proofs, and so many people are trying to use it. But I mean, they changed the height of the camera during the video. You can see that they make it get lower and lower to the ground, so there's more water. It's a really wavy day. I mean, it's edited, and if the boat really was going over, disappearing over the horizon, we'd be seeing it tilting away from us, and so on. There's lots of problems with that video. When in fact, there are videos on the internet where you can see at vast distance, much greater distances than that video, for instance, where the boat is still visible. I mean, perhaps on the next show I can have the time to prepare some videos to demonstrate this fact, that you can keep seeing the boat with if you have a powerful enough zoom lens. It's still there. I mean, it's just one of the really weakest arguments that is being used. I mean, the whole horizon thing is to do with how our eyes work, a vanishing point, and so on and so forth. But if things are really dipping over the horizon, or whether it's a boat or whether you're looking at a skyscraper or a skyline 60 miles away, like the Chicago skyline, they should be sort of tilted away from you, and we don't see that anywhere. We didn't see it in that video that they like to use. It's just video trickery that they're employing in that video.
Yeah, good stuff, mate. Well, I'll tell you what, this is an easy one to debunk, so we'll just put in one thought each, then we'll move on. I'll go to you there, allegedly, Dave. I'm sure you've seen these videos that supposedly show a sail ship going over the so-called curved Earth, and they're disappearing hull first. These videos, in my opinion, are another one of those really weak arguments for the spinning ball. I'm surprised they'd even waste time on it, but since they did, we can spend some time debunking it. What say you?
Yeah, it is a very weak argument. From our naked eye perspective, yes, it does seem like a boat starts to sink below the horizon. It's just that the vanishing point and the horizon and the bottom of the boat start to merge together, and with our eyesight. But as soon as you grab a pair of binoculars and then look at it, you see the bottom of the boat again. So it's debunked as easy as that. And to be honest, that sequence of images of that boat looked really fake to me. I don't know about anybody else, but it looked extremely fake. So it's something I can't really trust. I mean, 2 days ago I did an experiment. I went to the seashore, and I had my little tablet computer, and I looked myself up on Google Maps, measured off a distance. I think a distance to a landmark, which was about 3 miles, and did the spherical trigonometry to figure out the curvature, and yet I was able to see the absolute base. It was a kind of lighthouse thing, but I was able to see the base where the water was lapping up against the rocks at the bottom of the lighthouse, and that was about 3 miles away, where it should have been. And I'm not going to remember what the calculation is, but it should have been about 18 inches or something like that below the horizon.
3 miles is 6 feet.
Okay, 6 feet then. So it's just ridiculous. Anybody can do this. If you're near the sea, you can easily do this. It's obviously trickier if you're if you're on land and you've got lots of landmarks and trees and hills and stuff in the way. But if you're down by the sea, you can test it instantly.
I agree. And Dave Weiss, if we were to take someone who still is 100% spinning ball, and we were to take them down to the ocean, and they could see that a ship was disappearing hull first, seemingly, then we took a telephoto camera and we zoomed in, and all of a sudden, hey, the hull returned. Do you think that would be enough to convince them that this argument is bogus?
It's some people yes, some people no. But I'm going to take what allegedly Dave said as a little farther. Yes, there is a vanishing point. yes, it merges with the horizon as it goes farther away because of the limitation of our eyes. And yes, if you zoom in with a telescope, you can see it again, but sometimes actually you can't. And the reason for that is, this is where Jeranism's laser test is going to be very interesting. He's going to get a laser, and he's going to put it 3 inches above the water, or 6 inches above the water, whatever it is, and he's going to shoot it across, and if he could hit a building on the shore the same distance above the 6 inches, then all is well. But check out this graphic. So here's the laser on the top here. If it goes straight across, hits the building at 6 inches, all is well. But if there's just a 1 foot wave, which is a very small wave, somewhere out there, let's say they're going 5 miles or 5 miles, and it's a mile out, there's a 1 foot wave, that is going to skew the laser, and it's going to go feet. If it was a half a mile out there, or there was a 4 foot wave, 3 miles out there, or whatever, it's going to shoot it into space. You're going to lose the view of as things go down to the horizon. Your perspective gets skewed exponentially. So you're going to see ships. I've seen barges disappear what looks like over the horizon, but they're just disappearing over everything that is above my eye level in between them. The best place to see this is over the water because it's the flattest. You don't have trees, you don't have houses, you don't have hills, but waves, if they're an inch above your eyesight, are going to skew what you're seeing and create a false horizon.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, in the live chat, we've got a questioner who says that if what you're saying is true, Dave Weiss of Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, if what you're saying is true, then if she were to buy a powerful enough telescope, she should be able to see New Zealand, and if you can't see New Zealand, then that debunks the flat Earth. What do you say in reply to that?
Let me answer that. Not just solid objects block vision, block light. There's enough stuff in the atmosphere, fog, smog, smoke, bugs, particles, chemtrails, whatever, that over time it's going to just take your vision to zero. It's going to be enough stuff to block even light. When we look up into the heavens or whatever is above us, we're looking through a minuscule distance of thinning and clearing atmosphere. When we look across the horizon, we're looking through the thickest, most dense part, and it obscures our view. And there really are no clear days anymore with all of the geoengineering that's going on and everything else. You're not going to get a clear view. And then also you have to remember the waves in there. All of that is going to block your view of the true horizon. And in fact, the horizon should be 3 miles away if you're standing 6 feet tall. The Earth should be curved over where you can't see past 3 miles, but you can. I mean, I'm looking at beaches, 8-10 miles across Long Island Sound, and I can see where the shore hits the water. It's impossible.
And their reply in the live chat is there is no pollution between New Zealand and Australia. Of course, it's not just about pollution, even water vapor in the air. It just the fact that our air isn't pure oxygen. The air that we breathe is actually, oxygen is only one small component of it. There's all different kinds of things in the air, and over the course of 100, 1,000, I think the distance between Australia and New Zealand might be a couple of thousand kilometers. I'm not sure, but over long distances, all of a sudden, all of those particles, whatever they might be, add up. So I'm not sure if that is a very good objection to the flat Earth theory, but we've tried to address it. Now, listen, allegedly, Dave, I know you want to address the setting sun. I don't want to spend too much time on that because we are coming towards the end of the show, but very quickly in the live chat, people are asking, how can the sun set? Do you want to give your explanation, then throw to Matrix, and then we'll move on to the next topic?
How can the sun set? Well, the sun doesn't actually set. It's a fixed distance above the flat Earth. It's about 3,100 miles above, and it simply circles around the equator-ish, sort of skewing between the tropics, basically. And literally, as it comes towards you, it seems to rise because of the perspective effect. So as it comes towards you, it rises up in as if you're looking down a hallway, a long hallway, with lights in the ceiling. The lights, as they go away from you, seem to go downwards towards the horizon. So as the sun comes towards you, it seems to rise, and similarly, as it goes away from you, it seems to set. The point I was going to make about the setting sun, which kind of spoke to what Dave was saying, is that people have asked me that, you know, obviously, or said to me that obviously the sun is setting because when it's sunset over the sea, you see half the sun being blocked off supposedly by the Earth. But well, how I counter that is because the sun is a lot higher than, say, the clouds. The clouds on your vanishing point might be a thick band of cloud at the vanishing point, but the sun's above that, so you see more of it, and then as the sun goes further away, it gets obscured by the cloud, and it seems to look like that the Earth is like cutting off half the sun. Again, it's all down to perspective vision.
Matrix.
Let me just add one quick thing on that.
This is what we'll do. You get your final word on this topic in, then throw to Matrix, and we'll spend more time on this next week, I promise.
2 seconds. We've all seen where we've had storm clouds go by that are so thick that they really darken the sky, and that's only a tiny fraction of the amount of clouds and mist that's in between you when the sun is hitting the vanishing point, and there's a layer of clouds. It's way thicker than that, enough to darken out the sun. That's it.
Matrix.
Well, I mean, I live on the side of a mountain here and look across the valley, and I've got mountains all around me pretty much. And on a clear day, I can see like several miles, 4 miles, with the naked eye. But on other days, there's mist, and you can't, you can barely see at all. So it really depends on the conditions and how, the atmosphere, how much water there is there, the density of it. I mean, the atmosphere is more dense the lower to the ground that you are, the higher up you go, it becomes less dense. It just depends on, atmospheric conditions really as to how far you can see. There are limits as to how far we can actually see, even with telescopes. And I mean, there's definitely limitations to how the eye works. Vanishing point. I think Dave put up a graphic just now showing how perspective works, and that's why things appear to be it's an illusion that they are disappearing over the horizon or vanishing. But when in fact you can use the example of looking down a corridor. I mean, Dave's got the picture up now. I mean, the corridor is the same height all the way along, but it looks like it's disappearing, and from top to bottom and left to right and so on. So it's how our eyes work, and the thing to do with the sun, and it's just going out of sight. That's all.
Well, I can tell from the live chat that this is one topic that a lot of people are still struggling with, and it's one that I'm still struggling with. But I think I've kind of got my head around it. It does take a lot of reading, a lot of thinking. And I say that we make next week's episode, this will be the first topic that we address in great depth, because it's obviously something that is central to a lot of people. They're struggling with flat earth theory. This is a central component of their struggles with it. So, Dirth, I know you've got a little picture there about perspective, and like I said, we'll address that next week. We still have to get to some problems with the flat earth theory. So, Dave, I know you have to go. If you have to leave, just let me know, but I'm planning to press on a little bit longer than 2 hours because we've got more to get to. One more problem with the ball earth theory before we move on to our problems with flat earth is people saying that it's inductive reasoning. I think Lester Nedium, there's a character called Lester who made a video addressing press reset, and in it he makes the point that the press and others, they seem to be using an inductive logic when they say that, well, everything I see in the sky is a circle, so I must be living on a sphere. This is what we call inductive reasoning. I've got my points to make, but before I do, I want to go around the panel. So let's start off with you there, Matrix. You've been pretty quiet. What do you say in reply to people who say to you, well, everything I see in the sky is a circle, so I must be in a circle? Oh, no, not just on a circle, I must be in a sphere.
Yeah, it's an illogical argument. It's proof of nothing. It's just sort of appealing to an emotional bias that people have about the Earth being a sphere. We really don't know what they are. The planets are in space. They appear circular. I've heard this argument used before. That because water bubbles, water bubbles exist, therefore the Earth is a sphere. But there's other things that exist as well. Like crystalline shapes. Hard rock. If you want to look at proof, look at rocks. They're made of crystalline structures. They're not circular in how they're formed. The whole bubble argument is a nonsense one, and easily argued against. Let me come back on that. Let me think about it a little bit.
Allegedly, Dave, the latecomer, there's this, I've seen this argument a few times. Well, I see the moon, I see the sun, I see Saturn, they're all circular, so I'm on a sphere. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I get this sort of argument as well, that, objects naturally want to take the shape of a sphere. If they point at water in weightless conditions, as if that is the something natural. But one chap actually went as far as to say, well, if you look at fruits, that naturally wants to take a spherical shape. And I had to remind him of bananas and lemons and rhubarb and all sorts of others. But as Matrix said, it's a fallacious argument. It's trying to link, if you pardon the pun, basically apples and oranges, comparing apples and oranges. It's trying to say, well, I see this, so this must be the case. It's not. It's just a fallacious argument.
Dearth.
Comparing the Earth to the planets is, we don't even know what the planets are. In flat Earth theory, that the Earth could possibly be the center of the universe and everything's rotating around it. Perhaps as the ancients said, that all of the planets are, for lack of a better word, gods of some sort of sentient beings that are traveling around and affect our lives, and maybe they are discs, maybe they are, balls, or maybe they're discs, they appear around, and that's all we can say. There is evidence that there's moons or some things orbiting around them, kind of like, atoms have electrons, supposedly. Comparing them, they are not, the problem is people say Earth is a planet. Maybe it's not a planet. Earth is Earth, and planets are what they are.
Fair answer. Well, for me, I don't even accept that what we see in the sky are spheres. At best, you can say that we see circles. The sun and the moon appear to me to be circular, but I don't know that they're spherical. And then when you get to talking about stars or other so-called planets in the solar system, the best that we can see is something that looks 2D to me. Now, that doesn't mean that it is 2D, but just because it seems like it's circular doesn't necessarily mean that it's spherical. And I know that we don't have time tonight to talk about the influence of mainstream media and Hollywood films in implanting in our minds this idea that things are a ball. So we just, even if we don't believe Earth is a ball, we just accept that space is a ball. But the truth is, if we're trusting our eyes, or if we're trusting even the Hubble telescope, they're still giving us what are 2D images. So I don't even accept that what is up there is a sphere. It's a circle. And the flat Earth model suggests, many flat Earth models suggest that the flat Earth is also a circle, but it's a flat circle. So when people say, oh, but it's all circular up there, so we must be a sphere, I say, even if we accept that everything up there is a circle, and even if we accept that we have to be the same shape, it doesn't mean that we're a sphere. There's a difference between a sphere and a circle. So to me, this is another one of those terrible arguments for the spinning ball. Now, it's time to move on. We will wrap the show up relatively soon, but I think it's only fair that we be honest, if we have any objections to the flat Earth model, that we air them now and discuss them. So I'm talking with Matrix and Dearth, who both say they're pretty close to 100% flat. Flat Earth, they're confident in the flat Earth. Allegedly, Dave says 90%. I'm not even 50% yet, but I have gotten to very close to 100%. The spinning ball is just ridiculous. So let me be the devil's advocate here, and in many ways the devil's advocate. Here's a quick trivia question for you. I'll put all three of you on the spot. First one to respond gets the chocolates. What is the axial tilt of our spinning ball according to the official story?
23.4.
And what happens when you subtract 90, i.e. a right angle? What happens when you subtract that?
66.6.
66.6. What a coincidence. So let me play the devil's advocate here. Here's one of the problems I've got with the flat Earth. If the sun and the moon are disks or anything like a disk, how come they don't become elliptical as they move away from us? And how come they don't start off as elliptical as they get towards us? That is, going back to my analogy of us sitting in a room, if I'm on one wall and you're sitting on the other wall and we both look at a disk, we see opposite images of the disk, no problem. But if that disk, if we're looking at it, it won't look like a perfect circle. It'll look elliptical to us, and as it moves towards us, then it becomes a circle. If the sun and the moon are disks or anything like disks, how come they appear to stay like circles? I'll throw to you first, Matrix, and then we'll go around the panel.
Yeah, well, I believe it's an interesting conundrum to figure out, but I think that the same argument applies to the standard model of the moon being approximately 240,000 miles away. As it comes into view, you should see it, part of it one way, and then as it goes over the horizon, you should see it just being distorted the other way. I think it's like a very similar conundrum and problems that face both models, when we're looking at things like that. I think maybe atmospheric density distorts the shape, possibly makes it look bigger at the horizon and sunset. As sunrise and sunset, you're looking through more atmosphere. I think there are aspects of that to it. It's, for me, the moon is still a conundrum as to what it is exactly. I mean, I'd just like to add something on the previous thing about the sphere argument. I mean, when you take the Earth and you remove all the water from the Earth, I've seen a video, a scientific video about, the shape of the Earth. And when you remove the water from it, the landmass is some kind of distorted, ugly-looking rock, not, barely spherical at all. So I mean, when people want to argue that the Earth is a sphere, the rock is forming a sphere. You look at the models where they've removed all the oceans and so on. It's just ugly-looking piece of bubblegum, chewed up bubblegum. So I just want to add that in there.
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought that back up. In the live chat, Enchanted Wanderer says that you can clearly see the objects in the sky spherical with a telescope. I say with the greatest of respect, and we've discussed this before, no, you cannot. If you only have one eye, if you close one eye, then you can see objects that you believe are spherical, but based on your vision, all you can see is a circle because you're looking from one plane, and so it is with telescopes. If you could triangulate two telescopes from a great enough distance apart, then yes, you could make out a sphere. But because the official story is that these things are hundreds of millions of miles away, then there's no way that on this planet we can triangulate angles, so we can't actually know we're seeing spheres. We can see things that might be spheres, but all we can actually see, the only light data that we can interpret, is going to be essentially a 2D plane. That's not an opinion, that's just a statement of fact. Now, we'll come to you there, Dearth. I don't know if I've put this elliptical problem to you before, but do you believe the sun and the moon are like disks? And if you do, how do you explain that they don't become ellipses?
I'm not sure that the sun and the moon are the same, and honestly, I haven't quite figured it out yet. For the ball model or the flat model, I'm leaning towards that the moon is some sort of disk. Maybe it has some curve to it, so because of the phases of it. I don't know. Maybe it's self-lit. I go back and forth on whether the sun is a ball beaming light in all directions or slightly directional in some way. I don't know the answer.
Okay, we'll go to you there, not Dirth, to allegedly Dave. Any response to the elliptical problem is what I'm calling it.
Well, like I said in the beginning of my video, um, there's something I call the ant's perspective. That if you're an ant walking across the runway and a jumbo jet landed next to you, you'd have no idea what the hell just happened to you, and there's no way that from the ant's perspective, that it could logically work out what happened, because its mind isn't, just cannot comprehend what just happened. So we've got to accept that there may be stuff that we cannot comprehend. And I put the sun and the moon and things like that in that bucket because I don't know what shape the sun is. I don't know what the sun is at all. Nobody knows, even those who say they do. They don't know. So there's a quote that says the universe is under no obligation to make sense to us. and all I can say is I don't know.
No, I don't know either, and that's the thing. I'm not convinced that the sun and the moon are a flat disk, and I've gone to Eric Dubai's forum and I've tried to find out how he can explain the ellipse problem, and that's a point I always make. When you find a problem with flat Earth theory, you don't say, well, that's it, flat Earth theory is wrong, so I believe in the spinning ball. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Firstly, the first thing you should do is go and find out if someone else has an answer to your objections to one model or another. So I went to his forum.
Well, it goes the other ways too. If you find a problem with the spinning ball Earth model, do you say, oh no, let's throw that away? Nobody ever does that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I said at the start of the show too that this isn't a dichotomy. That there are some people trying to draw others into a false dichotomy where they say, well, you either accept our version or you accept their version. So if we can debunk their version, you have to accept ours. But that's nonsensical. There's a whole range of models out there to explain the universe that we're in, and you can't simply accept one because you've rejected another. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So we've already discussed that, allegedly, Dave. But the point that I'm making here is that if you're going to find one problem with one model, be it spinning ball, be it flat, be it concave, be it whatever, rather than simply saying, well, that's a problem, so that's it, or coming to a live chat and saying, how do you explain this, how do you explain this? Why not go to some of the sources and see if they've got answers for you? And that's what I did with the ellipse. I wasn't convinced by Dubai's answer, but what I've found with a lot of these problems with flat Earth theory is that it does take me a while to get my head around some of them. Some of them are easy, but some of them take a while. And so I'll keep thinking about this one, and if in a week or two when I finish his book I still can't get my head around his answer, then I'll go to his forum and I'll post a question. Who knows, maybe we'll get him on the show. But the point that I'm trying to make here is I am looking for problems with all models. I encourage all others to do the same. And I also encourage them, when you find a problem with the model, see if there is an answer for it before you go around saying, well, that's a problem and it's game over for that model. Now, allegedly, Dave, you say you're about 90% flat Earth. That means you've still got a bit of a quandary with it. What's the main issue that you have that stops you from saying you're 100%?
Again, it's the southern pole stars, if indeed they exist. Again, I don't know. I've never been down to where you are, and actually set up a camera and photograph the star trails and stuff. I can't find anything verified that says, well, yeah, that's exactly what happens, that the stars spin the opposite way round around a southern pole star. So I don't know. So that's the only thing. I can't find anything in the flat Earth model that would explain the southern pole star and the motion around it.
Can I ask you, have you actually seen star trails that in the southern hemisphere that do spin around a southern pole star? Is there a southern pole star?
I don't know.
Because I've seen footage that kind of looks like star trails around a south celestial pole, but I still haven't found footage that shows a proper rotation like we see in the north. And if we are on a spinning ball, then there definitely should be a south celestial pole. Not necessarily a star, as is the case with the North Pole star, but there should be a center point of focus around which everything else spins. There has to be if we're on a spinning ball, and I haven't seen that footage. but I did see what looked like star trails not going around the northern celestial star pole. And for me, I was like, well, how do you explain that? But Dubai does have an explanation for that. He says that it's a matter of perspective, and he's got a video about it. I'll post a link in the info box underneath this one. But his explanation for me sort of makes sense from the star trails not spinning all around the north, but it's not completely convincing. If we can find video footage of the stars rotating around a south celestial pole, not necessarily a star, but just a south celestial pole, that will be a huge objection to the flat Earth model. Matrix, what say you?
Yeah. I mean, the South Pole stars. I mean, I'm just above the equator, in the northern hemisphere here in Spain. So, and I haven't been able to get down to Australia to film to verify it for myself. I look at videos online and I find them suspect. I mean, it's so easy to just flip a video in QuickTime or whatever movie software you use. You can use fisheye lenses, and there's all kinds of things and tricks that can be employed to promote a possible deception. I mean, I'm waiting for somebody to, show us the evidence that, somebody, in our community to show us the evidence that they've independently filmed and proved that they filmed it and showed their rotation around the stars, around the South Pole star. But there are different arguments. How that is not the case. There's various evidence to suggest that the Antarctica is to travel around it is like 60,000 miles. It takes years to do so if you're going to go around Antarctica. And one of the big problems with the whole star issue is, if stars working on a spinning ball, how does that work? I mean, if we're rotating at 1,000 miles an hour around the equator and then circling the sun at 67,000 miles an hour, and then the sun's traveling through the galaxy at 600,000 miles an hour or something like that, and there's always spinning and rotation going on and so on. We see the same stars in the sky night after night after night, century after century, millennia after millennia, and they're exactly the same. We should be seeing some stars all crossing paths and so on. And this curious alignment with Polaris that we have, it doesn't change ever. So basically, Polaris, which is like so many quadrillion miles away, such a vast, it seems to conveniently mirror, but all the other stars are axis that we're spinning on. So I mean, there's a lot more problems with the spinning ball model on the stars and how they actually work. So I mean, the star argument works both ways. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, the official story response to the stars, though, because, I mean, the problem is the constellations look the same as they did thousands of years ago, allegedly, and how come if we're hurtling through space around the sun, I mean, it's like if you're on a train or even in a car, the trees that are closest to you look like they're whizzing by faster. The ones in the distance don't move as quickly. It should be the same with the stars, that their positions relative to each other from our perspective, they should change and they don't. And the official story explanation for if we're whirling through space around the sun, they don't. So the official story explanation for why that is because the stars are so far away, they're light years away. And according to Dubai, and I haven't checked his references for this yet, but it seems plausible to me, he says that the whole concept of light years was one of those things that they invented sort of post facto to try to explain the ball, like to keep the ball Earth model. As in, they had the ball Earth model. Someone said, hey, okay then, how come we don't see any change of the stars' position relative to each other? And they said, oh, well, actually, that's because the stars are so far away. They're all so far away. They're light years away. They had to come up with this whole new distance measurement just to explain away the missing parallax, if that makes sense. But I'll tell you what, guys, it's almost time to wrap the show up. Do any of you have any more objections to the flat Earth model that you want to bring up tonight? Because what we can do is, during the week, we can try and come up with some more objections to flat Earth, and we'll spend more time next week covering it. But I thought it's only fair that we at least give our own objections to the flat Earth model. Obviously, our friends at We'll Do It Live didn't seem to want to give any objections to spinning ball model. They're 100% spinning ball. We've been honest enough to say that we're not 100%. A couple of us are 99%. One of us is 90%. I myself am less than 50%. But that's what the whole point of skepticism is questioning all different sides, looking for evidence. So do any of you have any more objections to the flat Earth model that you want to air tonight, or do you want to wait for next week?
John, I just have one more comment on this. I live in the northern hemisphere here, and if I go out on my deck and if I put myself right in the corner of my deck and I look up across my roof line, I could see Polaris. It's there all year long, every day. I mean, every night, sunrise, sunset. I could see it. It never moves. You should be able to do the same. You don't even need a telescope. Identify where your south star is. Align yourself up with something so you know you're looking in the same spot, and see if it's there. See if it moves. I mean, you're in Australia. That's all it would take, to get your verbal. You'd have to photograph it to convince anybody else, but you should be able to do that just visually without even binoculars.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of these things people can test for themselves. And you can bet that this is one of the things that I want to test as well. There are other people telling me that they're going to test it, and hopefully by all working together, by trying to debunk Ball Earth and trying to debunk Flat Earth, that's the whole point that we made at the start of the show. These things are theories. They're supposed to be falsifiable, so let's try to falsify them. If we can falsify them, we can reject them, and if we can't falsify them, then it makes the theory stronger. Now, I've seen enough evidence against spinning ball that I think I'm pretty much convinced that the spinning ball model just doesn't work. But the more evidence we can find for that, the better. Similarly, flat Earth. If we can debunk both, then we move on to the next theory and we keep refining ideas until we know exactly what it is that we're standing on. Now, it is time, guys, to wrap up the show, because I think if you can keep it to 2 hours, 2.5 hours, there's more chance that people will want to listen. If they see a 3 or a 4 hour show, sometimes they can get a bit put off by that. So I say we wrap the show up now, but we will come back next week. We'll reconvene if you guys want to join us. But for episode 2, it's time for some final thoughts. So we'll start with you there, Matrix. I'm glad you could join us again. Obviously, we had our impromptu chat during the week, which I enjoyed, and apparently other people did too. I've got 1,000 views and counting. So I'm glad you could join us again tonight, live from Spain. Any final thoughts for episode 2?
There's so much to discuss on this subject. I mean, one of the things that was mentioned last night was the belief in science, the unwavering belief in science. Various scientists are promoted and taught in our schools, and we hear it on the media all the time. People like Einstein, Newton, etc., and Darwin, all to reinforce their narrative, their model. And yet, what about someone like Nikola Tesla? Totally erased from history, one of the greatest minds into free energy and creating electricity and so many wonderful ideas, totally hidden from us until recently, because people are investigating things like HARP and various technologies. He's been censored from history, one of the greatest scientists, that would change so many aspects of the way we live. So, people's belief in science is flawed. I mean, because they're trusting the scientists that have been put forth by the authorities, by the governments, that control the scientific community. And another point that was brought up last night was the number of flat Earth videos on YouTube, and how it's like, there's hundreds of thousands or whatever, and several every day and something. It keeps increasing the number. And they wanted to say that that's suspicious, Well, it's because lots of people are looking at the evidence and they're getting onto the subject and they're speaking out about it. They're making videos, they're trying to demonstrate and prove it, they're doing the experiments, and they're coming up with different models, different ideas, and questioning it. And that's one of the reasons why there's this big surge in new YouTube videos. And last night they seem to be making it as if there's some dodgy conspiracy, like hundreds of thousands of people making videos about flat Earth, for sinister purposes. It's about the subject. It's really seems to be taking off, and lots of people are making different videos and making great videos, and we're learning from them, every day. So, I'd just say the belief in science is a mistaken loyalty, and a lot of people are going to find it hard to let go of that paradigm, whether they believe in evolution, the Big Bang, or what have you. And they want to hold on to it. They're holding on to that belief, and for some of those people, it makes it harder to look into this subject, harder to take it seriously, because it really challenges their whole belief system. And that's what I've got to say. Thanks for having me on.
It doesn't challenge their belief system; it challenges their world view. And as all of us know, who've ever tried to explain to someone why no one died or got hurt at Sandy Hook, Boston bombings, what have you, it's hard enough to change their view about one event, but what we're talking about here is changing their worldview. It's not easy, and so it's a good thing where we can collaborate together. And if you were just reading these books by yourself or doing this research by yourself, it'd be easy to think, gee, maybe I am crazy. Maybe the spinning ballers, maybe they know what's going on. But with shows like this, with live chats like the one that we have, people can share their ideas, they can share their questions, and hey, if you can disprove my theory about Coriolis, terrific. And if you can explain to me on a flat Earth how the sun and the moon don't turn into ellipses, terrific. Whether you've got points to make about being for or against ball or flat or concave or what have you, all constructive criticism is welcome. That's the way that it's meant to be. And Matrix, we talked about scientism on the impromptu chats. For those who haven't heard it yet, just go to my channel, John LeBon. Matrix and I had a very late, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, my time when we started the call, but we had a 3-hour chat and we discussed things like scientism and the fact that a lot of people, their new faith system is what we call science. But like we discussed on that show, Matrix, what we call science today doesn't actually follow many times actual scientific method. It's not falsifiable, and the faith that people put in it, it's misplaced. And we don't have time to go into that tonight. But those who want to hear my thoughts and your thoughts on that, they can just go to the impromptu chats from a few days ago and listen to that for themselves. We'll move over to you there, Dirth. I want to thank you again for pitching the idea of a Ball Earth, a flat Earth show. We've gone with the title Ball Earth Skeptic. I'm glad that we did. We're 2 episodes in. We've had 50 people watching live right throughout the show, and the last episode got over 1,000 listens. So clearly people want us to discuss these things, and I'm glad that we're doing it. And I'm glad that you're here to join us, Dirth. So final thoughts for episode 2.
People say they're waiting for some big scientists, educators to come out and get behind this. And my point is anybody that is in academia, if they come out against this, they lose everything. They lose their funding. They lose they risk everything. People, like if Nassim Haramein, who's having a difficult enough time, with his amazing research, people are like, well, he doesn't have a college education. He's fringe. If he came out with this, they would discredit everything he's ever done, and without investigation again. What I can say is there are a lot of intelligent people. I'm not saying I'm the smartest person out there, definitely not, but there are some intelligent broadcasters that are working on this right now and will be coming out with programs saying that they are Ball Earth skeptics in a big way in the very near future. And I'm looking forward for those to go out there. It's going to convert a lot of people.
It's exciting times, Dirth, and I'm glad that I can share, these shows with yourself and Matrix and allegedly Dave. I'm glad you could make it for the show, even if it was just for the last half hour. So I'm sorry you didn't get more of a say this week. You were kind of the special guest last week, but this week you just won on the panel, and we didn't really get to hear much of your thoughts. But if you're here on time next week, we'll give you the floor. But for episode 2, any final thoughts?
Okay, I don't mind not being special for a change. The only thought I'd like to talk about is similar to what Matrix said, because I'm hearing a lot of people saying that this whole flat Earth business is a distraction. It's COINTELPRO, by the CIA to get people distracted off into wild conspiracy theories. But what I found is when I started looking at this, there weren't an awful lot of videos around, and there wasn't a lot of interest in it. But when I started to get it, I had this fever. I had this longing to find out more information, and I spent hours and hours and hours looking at stuff and researching. And I found that when I speak to people who have looked at this, they've done exactly the same over and time again. They've discovered this thing, they've got it, and all of a sudden this passion overtakes them to find out. Now the same thing happened to me with 9/11. As soon as I got it, I ended up looking and researching for hours, and days on end without rest. That means something to me. That means that we intuitively see the truth in it, and that's what I like to say to those people who say it's a distraction, because when you
Good stuff, David. I mean, the point that you can make is that if someone's telling you that those who question the spinning ball, they're just here to distract us, they're here to discredit us, they're here to do all of these terrible things, but then in the next breath they say, oh, and they're here to make you afraid and to not believe in anything, then you think to yourself, well, hold on, aren't you, by trying to say that they're the bad guys, aren't you trying to spread fear? My position is always that the truth doesn't have to be defended. The truth, let it go and it will take care of itself. So let people seek the truth. And I know that some people out there, they're thinking, well, if I were to start investigating this, if I were to tell people that I do have some problems with the spinning ball model, they might think less of me. What happens if I do that, but then I discover that it is a ball? Then I'll look stupid for even questioning it. I would put to you that anyone who wouldn't question something that they were trained to believe from birth, just because they were afraid they would look crazy, they're the crazy ones. I mean, what is wrong with you that there's anything in your life, be it big or small, that you won't spend time questioning out of fear? To me, that's utterly ridiculous. If I get to the point in 6 or 12 months where I'm like, no, I'm convinced it's a spinning ball and we're hurtling around the sun and the sun's hurtling through space, and I can't believe I thought Dubai was legitimate. I can't believe I read his book. If I get to that point, then fine. By the time I get to that point, I'll have far better arguments to refute flat earthers than I did at the start, because the whole reason why I started looking into this was because the flat earthers had some points that I couldn't counter, and rather than go into cognitive dissonance mode or to pretend it didn't exist or to try to find one thing that I disagree with about them, or 2 or 3 things, and then say, aha, there's 1 or 2 things I disagree with, so now I can just put them out of my mind. Instead of doing that, I said, well, I'll look further. And as soon as I started looking further, I started to realize that there are some big problems with the spinning ball, and I'm not a flat earther. All I am right now is a ball earth skeptic. And if you've listened to this show for the last 2.5 hours with an open mind, I've got a sneaking suspicion that whether or not you limit it publicly, you're starting to become a ball earth skeptic as well. And welcome to the other side. It's a beautiful place. I've loved every minute of it. I've managed to make a few online friends who contacted me, and we've started talking about these things. It's a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it. And I've especially enjoyed doing this show. This is now the 3rd week that we've done it, if you include episode 0. I've enjoyed all the comments in the live chat. I haven't had to ban a single person from the live chat. There were 1 or 2 people in there who were spouting nonsense, but I thought it was relatively harmless, and the rest of the chat was terrific. I apologize for not asking more questions and reading out more comments. I'll endeavor to do that next week. But for episode 2 of the Ball Earth Skeptic, on the 18th of June 2015, or at least it was when we started the show. It's now almost 1 o'clock here on a Friday in Australia. For episode 2, we're going to wrap it up right now. I want to say a huge thanks to you, the listener, whether you're listening live, on delay on YouTube, or on mp3 in the future, just for taking the time to listen, to consider what we're talking about. That means a lot to me. I hope it means a lot to you. We'll see you at 10:15 p.m. Thursday next week, 8:15 a.m. Thursday next week, American time, 10:15 p.m. Australian time. We'll see you there, but until then, take care of yourselves and question everything.